Welcome to Quarantine Theater. Tonight we present Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Scene one. The screen is in darkness and somewhere a child is crying. It is a bitter, desolate sound like that of a frightened child locked up alone in a strange room. The echoes of this despairing plea for comfort seem to reverberate not only through space, but back down the years to some long distant past. A large male hand releases the lid of an old-fashioned Jack-in-the-Box type doll. The lid is slowly pushed up by a chubby, hairless doll with wide, unblinking eyes that rise out of the darkness of the box with a sinister kind of lethargy, like a blind snake reaching for the sun. Watching this performance and completely terrified by it is a little girl of no more than 4 years who is crying bitterly and trying to hide her face in her mother's dress. The doll rises from its box. The girl's horrified sobs mingle with the peculiarly metallic weeping sound of the mechanical doll. The young mother, embarrassed by her daughter's behavior, starts to pull away towards the theater entrance. The big, insensitive-looking theater attendant, whose hand started this performance, squeezes the doll back into its box and turns away, laughing harshly, to replace the toy on a display stand that contains several more of the mechanical dolls. The extravagant architecture of a small town theater blends with the elaborate late 19th century facade of the buildings that surround it. We are on Main Street in a sleepy little California town. It is late afternoon and summer, and the date is 1913. The mother comes out of the theater entrance and moves away up the street with the little girl still hugging fretfully at her hand. A horseless carriage passes through the frame and goes popping and chattering away down the almost deserted street, leaving behind a thin cloud of dust that settles slowly on the hot, unmetalled road. Across the way at the theater entrance, a commissionaire is propping open the doors in preparation for the matinee audience that will soon be coming out. As the camera tracks to a medium shot, we hear the sounds of a small theater pit orchestra drift out onto the street. The camera comes to rest on a poster couched in the peculiarly naive phrasing that dates from a time when advertisements were unsophisticated and people were inclined to believe them. The poster announces the star attraction, the one and only Baby Jane Hudson, the diminutive dancing Deuce from Duluth. The camera moves away into a medium shot past a board that reads "House Full." Around the corner of the building, where at the bottom of a short alley, a few of the less fortunate who were unable to get tickets or could not afford them stand by the stage door waiting patiently for a brief view of their little idol. Group shot of mothers with their long linen skirts, summer blouses, and wide-brimmed straw hats watch over their beribboned little girls like indulgent gars as the little ripple of eager anticipation goes through the group. Interior theater. Holding the stage entirely on her own, Baby Jane Hudson, a pudgy 6-year-old with golden curls cascading down her shoulders, is performing a tap dancing routine. Her movements are highly competent but mechanical and devoid of any real imagination or joy. Standing in the wings, engrossed in his daughter's performance, is Ray Hudson, smooth-featured and good-looking in an unremarkable way. With slicked back hair, tailored blazer, and lacquered straw hat, he looks like an imitation of an imitation. At his side is his wife, Cora, a crushed, colorless, but not unsympathetic woman in her early 40s. Standing in front of Cora is their first child, Blanche. At 13, Blanche Hudson is just entering the awkward, gangling stage of early adolescence, but the face already bears signs of a personality that's years later are going to make her a star. Cora rests her hand on Blanche's shoulder in a gesture that denotes ownership rather than affection. As the tap dancing routine nears its climax, Ray Hudson exhorts his child to greater efforts.
That's a girl, Janie. Show him how.
Blanche looks up at her father with an expression that combines jealousy with distaste, but he does not notice her. From up in the flies, Baby Jane looks like a tubby dwarf gyrating on a brightly lit stage. A stagehand and an electrician lean on the railing of the flies and look down glumly. Jack?
They've
Jack.
missed a trick with that child. They should have had her play the violin on roller skates.
Don't worry, they will.
He turns away to adjust a spotlight. Baby Jane finishes her routine and curtsies demurely. Ray Hudson comes onto the stage, echoing the rapturous applause with some hand clapping of his own. With a quick smile for Baby Jane, he turns to the audience and raises his hands in a well-practiced gesture of helplessness to quell the applause.
Thank you, folks. Thank you very much. Now, you're maybe going to find this hard to believe, but this little trooper here is just an ordinary little girl, like any one of your own. And maybe she's not such a little different. She's not so different from one of your bigger girls out there.
Matronly mother in the stalls bridles ecstatically. Ray Hudson smiles patronizingly.
Yes, sir. I don't think Baby Jane's one bit different from any of you, except maybe she's had a little more practice. Well, anyway, golly, you know, a little girl like that gets tired.
Eyes down and scuffing her foot on the boards, Baby Jane shows little sign of fatigue.
So I'm going to have to ask you folks just one final request.
The rest of his speech is drowned in an uproar of female voices with a few piping childish ones thrown in, all clamoring for their favorite number. But this is clearly a well-rehearsed routine because although no single title is heard more clearly than another, Ray Hudson has already exchanged a glance with the leader of the five-piece orchestra, and the musicians have already turned over their scores when Ray finally throws up his arms as if giving way to some inevitable and overwhelming demand.
Okay. I'm writing to Daddy. I guess that's everybody's favorite. Leastways, we never seem to get through a show without it. Janie, would you care to sing I'm Writing to Daddy for the folks?
Certainly.
As she steps forward with complete assurance, Ray Hudson goes to sit at the piano at the side of the stage. The lights go down, and the orchestra breaks into a cloyingly sweet arrangement of a simple tune.
Oh, the postman, he won't mind, 'cause Mama says that heaven's near. Though you've left us both behind, I'm writing, Daddy dear, I love you.
As the song comes to an end, the spotlight is extinguished and there is a moment of silence and darkness. Then the lights go up and the audience breaks into a roar of applause. Ray Hudson comes forward at the footlights and reaches down to help a little boy up onto the stage. The boy, dressed in a black tuxedo and looking like a miniature adult, presents Baby Jane with an almost life-size doll in a cellophane box. Baby Jane makes an excellent job of appearing surprised and gratified. She hugs the box to her little chest, grabs the boy, and kisses him firmly on the cheek. The doll is an accurate replica of Baby Jane. The audience wildly applauds and chuckles its approval of Baby Jane's onstage antics. The boy in the tuxedo is released and scampers away into the wings. Baby Jane curtsies, bows to both sides, and the curtain begins to fall. Ray Hudson steps forward quickly and holds up his hands appealingly.
Thank you. We're really glad you liked the show. And now, don't forget, there's a genuine Baby Jane doll just waiting for you to collect her out in the foyer. And remember, kids, you gotta tell your mom that every one of those cute little dolls is an exact likeness of your own Baby Jane Hudson. Now, if you'll just...
Flanked by the display stand with the Jack-in-the-Box dolls is an even larger stand on which there is a regiment of identical, vacant-looking Baby Jane dolls. The big attendant is standing guard, and the $1.50 sign prominently displayed above the stand provides a harsh contrast to Ray Hudson's honeyed words. Many mothers and excited children, clinging to either hand, hurry through the theater foyer in a harnessed attempt to reach the stage door before Baby Jane finishes her performance. Baby Jane stands bored and impatient in the middle of the stage. As Ray Hudson appears from behind the curtains, she turns on her heel, thrusts the box with doll in it into her mother's hands, and strides purposefully off into the wings. The parents and Blanche follow. Stage door. The group waiting outside the stage door has grown considerably. And that moment, there is a buzz of excitement near the front of the crowd, and the stage door opens. A little girl hops up and down, whining.
I can't see, Mommy. I can't see her.
The mother picks up the little girl and raises her awkwardly to her shoulders. Ray Hudson pauses in the doorway to wait for baby Jane, who follows reluctantly and then stops altogether as a great sigh of delight rises from the crowd. Still dressed as for the stage, baby Jane blinks in the sunlight, her little fists bunched in anger.
I won't. I don't want to go back in the old hotel. I don't want to take a nap. You can't make me.
Ray bends down quickly in a vain effort to hide Jane's burst of temper from the crowd. Cora Hudson remains in the doorway looking unhappy and ineffectual.
Now, Janie, don't act up, sweetheart. You've got to take your nap. You know that.
No, I don't know that, and I'm not going to.
Come on now, Janie. You don't want your nice little friends to think you're a bad little girl. Now, do you?
I don't care. I want sweet ice.
But Jane, I told you.
I want it.
As Cora hurries forward to try and relieve the situation, Blanche is revealed in the doorway. She stares in horror at the fascinated crowd and shrinks back in an agony of embarrassment as Jane begins to scream.
I make the money so I can have what I want.
Jane is trying to drag away from her father, who holds her by one arm.
Now, Jane, that's enough.
Leave me alone. I need an ice.
The Hudsons are defeated by her sheer determination, and Ray weakly tries to make a joke of his defeat.
Well, I guess if you need an ice, you better have one. I mean, it's a pretty hot day and all. But that's the last time this week. You understand?
Baby Jane immediately relaxes and her expression becomes demure again.
All right, Daddy.
Ray's relief is pathetic. He takes out a handkerchief to mop his face, then suddenly Jane has another demand, but this time there is no artifice. For a brief moment, she is no perfectly natural, affectionate little girl. She turns her head to look at Blanche.
Blanche wants one too. We got to have an ice for Blanche.
Irritated almost beyond endurance by the very thought of another delay, Ray turns to look at Blanche. There is a moment's silence, as if all of them, both the crowd and her family, were waiting for Blanche's reply. She hovers in the doorway, struggling for words.
No, I don't want anything.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
Blanche looks around wildly, then rushes back into the theater to hide herself. Jane simply shrugs, turns and walks into the waiting and somewhat stunned crowd, followed by her angry father. Cora pauses, turns back toward the theater, then decides to seek out Blanche. Blanche stands in the wings, pretending to watch the jugglers who are now performing. Cora silently and solicitously approaches and is about to speak when Blanche turns and discovers her. Then Blanche turns quickly away and walks to a water cooler. Her mother patiently and slowly follows. Cora hesitates, uncertain whether Blanche is listening.
You mustn't mind, sweetheart. Your father didn't mean it. Not the way it seemed. He didn't.
Blanche keeps her eye firmly on the water cooler, refuses to turn towards her mother.
It's just that he has to give Janie a lot of attention that he can't give to, oh, I got lost, I'm sorry. Give a lot of attention, can't give special attention that to give to you or even to me. Focus for her work. We owe such a lot to Janie, all of us.
Blanche clenches cup in her hand and scowls at the jugglers.
If it weren't for her, we wouldn't have all the nice things we enjoy. We wouldn't have your pretty clothes. We couldn't go to the seashore in the summer, to your mother. Oh, sorry. So you wouldn't be able to have your dramatic lessons either. We miss an awful lot of Janie. Works so hard for all of us.
Cora leans closer, but Blanche, refusing to meet her eye, remains staring at the act in progress. The jugglers are nearing the end of their act and now are receiving considerable applause from the crowd.
You're the lucky one, though, Blanche. Really, you are.
Cora moves even closer to her daughter as she tries to persuade her that patience will prevail.
One day it'll be you that getting all the attention. And when that happens, you must try to be kinder to Janie and your father than they are to you now. Do you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
I hope you try to remember that.
I won't forget.
She turns and walks away quickly towards the stage door.
You can bet I won't forget.
One of Hollywood's lesser epics is on the screen at a film studio with Baby Jane playing the lead. 18 years on and unrecognizable as the child we once knew, Baby Jane is moving towards a crisis in the story. Her gestures are exaggerated, her silence is too long, and her breathing heavy. The climax of the story has arrived and Baby Jane is about to make a fateful decision.
Okay, that's enough.
The picture fades and the soundtrack grinds to a stop with Jane's voice dropping to a gurgling bass before it finally dies. The lights go up in the theater to reveal David Feldman, an aggressively active executive producer, and Marty McDonald, a smoother, less powerful personality who is an agent. Feldman has risen and is already heading to the door. McDonald follows.
Well, what'd you think, Dave?
What's thinking got to do with it? She stinks, doesn't she?
They say the ending's pretty good. Maybe we should have seen it through.
Please.
Projectionist appears from the back of the theater.
You gonna want that picture again today, Mr. Feldman?
I don't think anybody's ever going to want that picture again.
He goes through the door, leaving McDonald to give the perplexed projectionist a sympathetic shrug and then hurries out. The projectionist and his assistant are busy unloading the machine and rewinding the film.
When the old man hired them Hudson sisters, how come he had to hire the back end of the act too? Boy, what a no-talent broad that Baby Jane is.
You'd think at least she could stay sober.
Feldman walks moodily along the path, flanked by shrubs. He pauses to let McDonald catch up with him.
You're her agent, Marty. You're supposed to look after her interests as well as Blanche's. Why don't you do everybody a favor and let us buy up her contract? We'll pay her double and she can retire like she should have done 10 years ago.
I don't know how I could put a proposition like that to Baby Jane, even if Blanche agreed. I mean, Jane's got her pride and she's a pretty sensitive girl.
Listen, your pretty sensitive girl gurgled her way through 6 cases of scotch, slugged 2 studio cops, not to mention 1 or 2 less savory items of publicity before we got that so-called epic in the can. Don't talk to me about sensitive. Anyway, you don't have to talk to Jane. If Blanche will give us an out on that clause in her contract that says Baby Jane has to make 1 picture for every picture we make with Blanche, then Baby Jane's contract isn't going to be any problem. That's what we keep lawyers for.
Yeah, but somehow I don't see Blanche doing that.
They have come out onto the studio road beside the soundstage, in front of which, a specially marked Blanche Hudson parking bay, there is an enormous 12-cylinder 1931 Hispano Suiza. Feldman wanders over to the car and begins to examine it with an abstracted, pensive air.
I don't get it. Blanche Hudson's just about the biggest thing in movies today. She can write her own ticket, pick her own scripts, and she's got more money than she knows what to do with.
You're telling me. She just bought that tremendous place Valentino used to have, and it's going to take more than a year to have it done over the way she wants it before they move in.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess they can manage to struggle by where they are now. Anyway, the point is she ought to have more sense than think she's ever going to make a star out of Baby Jane again.
Blanche has no illusions about that, but she's a very fine person, Dave. She's never going to forget those early years and what her sister did for her. She told me that herself.
Well, I'll tell you, she's not doing Baby Jane any favor. Sooner or later, that girl's going to wind up in a home. Look, you're going to that party tonight at the Grove, aren't you?
Did you ever try to refuse one of Blanche's invitations?
All right, well, okay. Do me a favor, will you? Talk to Blanche. Try to make her understand.
I'll do my best.
Thanks. Hey, reminds me to send you one of those Baby Jane dolls for Christmas.
Thanks. I already got mine this year.
Feldman has been running his hands thoughtfully over one of the car's great headlamps.
I don't know. What do they make these monsters like this for?
For Blanche Hudson.
Feldman looks wonderingly down the length of the enormous, menacing bonnet without apparently hearing MacDonald's words or being aware of his presence. Dissolve, the Hudson House, night. Starting on 4 heavy iron bars which fill the screen like the windows of a prison cell. Pull back to reveal the dim outline of the huge wrought iron gates as seen from just inside the drive. A glow of lights approaches. The throbbing of a big car's engine increases in volume. 2 headlight beams swing toward camera, approach rapidly, then stop and remain stationary. The idling cylinders can be heard thumping like the engines of a big ship. A door is slammed and the silhouette of a female figure moves towards the gates, its shadow growing larger as it moves away from the headlights. As the figure reaches toward the open gate, the engine of the car suddenly increases in volume. The lights appear to grow brighter and then surge toward the camera with exhaust bellowing furiously. There is a wild scream, a sound like an explosion, and the screen is thrown into momentary darkness. Fade in, main titles. A single headlamp is still burning, staring blindly up toward the skyline. Camera moves forward, passes through the damaged gates, and starts a detailed examination of the car. A single set of footsteps can be heard moving about with uncertainly. Then they increase their pace, move away, and finally break into a run. Holding as the subject in a constant close shot, camera travels over the wrecked car with loving care, passing over the crumpled radiator and along the buckled bonnet. Camera peers through the shattered windshield to reveal that both the front seats are empty. The doors have burst open, and lying on the concrete paving beneath the running board is a baby Jane doll. The face has been split away and a jagged line from brow to chin exposing the hollow head and crude mechanism of wires that operate the movement of a glassy, sightless eyes. The remaining half of the face still shows the silly, perfect, dead smile. Fade out. Hudson House. Starting as in previous scenes on the bars of the gate, pull back to reveal that the gates have long since been repaired. A 1962 Buick passes smoothly through frame right to left, coming from the opposite direction, traveling more slowly and braking as it comes. A 1962 Ford passes in front of the gates. Camera pans to follow the Ford as it turns into the drive adjacent to that of the Hudson House. The Ford turns off the gravel drive and comes to rest on concrete parking area. Mrs. Bates, a handsome, well-preserved woman in her late 40s, steps out of the car and glances almost involuntarily in the direction of the Hudson House across the way. The Spanish-style house lies shuttered and silent in the late afternoon sun. At first sight, the house gives the impression of a deserted fortress, but the half-open garage doors reveal part of a dated, expensive car. And as it travels slowly past the shuttered windows up the second floor, camera reveals an open window behind which a piece of light curtain material stirs gently, faintly in the breeze. Mrs. Bates turns away with something like regret, slams the car door and moves toward the back of her house. Curled up on the sofa in a kind of tangled position that comes naturally only to yogis and teenage females, Liza Bates is watching television with the cool, detached appraisal of a sophisticated 16-year-old. The rich, yeasty music and occasional snatches of dialogue indicate without the necessity of vision that someone in an old movie is suffering a grave emotional crisis. The door opens behind Liza and Mrs. Bates comes into the room. Liza does not look up, and seeing the television set, Mrs. Bates stops to watch, her eyes quickly taking on a faraway, wistful expression. On the television screen, the tragic heroine, Blanche Hudson, is playing out a scene with a minor character, a desk clerk or a butler.
Who shall I tell them called?
Doesn't matter now. Not anymore.
Hey, lady, you left your purse. Can you beat that?
He looks at camera, puzzled by the vagaries of human nature. As the masked violins swell up to assault the audience's emotions, Liza turns, becoming aware of someone's presence, and is mildly surprised at the faraway look in her mother's face. She looks back to the screen. An unspeakably cheerful announcer comes on bearing aloft a tin of dog food between two fingers as if it were some rare jewel.
Sorry to break in on this fine old Blanche Hudson movie, folks, but you'll be glad I did when you see what I have here for your favorite pooch of yours.
Liza scrambles to her feet.
Ah, shut up.
She turns down the volume, leaving the announcer to mouth his slogans in silence.
I remember when I first saw that picture. I thought it was just wonderful.
Yeah, when was that?
I seem to remember that your father took me to see it at the Old Majestic. That was before we were married.
Gee, she must be about 150 by now.
As a matter of fact, dear, I think Blanche Hudson's just a few years older than I am.
Really?
Yes, dear. Really.
Mrs. Bates comes around to sit on the sofa and wait for the show to recommence.
Well, how come we never see her around? We've been living next door to them for 6 months now, and the only one I ever see is that fat sister slouching around. Don't they ever have company? I mean, it must be awful being on their own like that. Julie says that sister's a lush. You ever seen her loaded?
No, I never have.
Well, that's what Julie told me. She said that she was supposed to be responsible for the accident where Blanche Hudson got crippled.
Well, that was a very long time ago, and maybe you shouldn't pay too much attention to everything that Julie Fowler tells you. There's too many people in this town with nothing to do but talk.
Maybe so, but Julie's folks have lived here an awful long time. I guess she should know.
Turn up the volume. We're missing the picture.
As Liza gets up, Mrs. Bates settles herself more comfortably on the sofa to enjoy a further bout of nostalgic sentiment. On the camera screen, Blanche Hudson is playing out another emotional crisis, standing over a grave as the only mourner at a funeral, or looking in through the rain-streaked window at a wedding to which she has not been invited, or merely standing alone and forlorn. Blanche Hudson is the perfect tragic heroine of the late 30s. Hudson House bedroom. Starting on a close shot of television screen as in previous scene, pull back to reveal Blanche Hudson huddled in a wheelchair. She is watching the screen of a portable television set with a sad, wistful fascination. 30 years on, Blanche has retained much of her former appearance. The sharply defined features of the exquisite face have hardly changed, only the eyes. The celebrated luminous dark eyes are hollower, sadder, more tired. But the beauty is still there. If anything, more assured, refined, and impressive than the image on the screen. Blanche still dresses with all the flair and taste she was famous for, as if at any moment she were going to be called upon to face her public again. Although the room is sparsely furnished to allow freedom of movement for the wheeled chair, the few articles of furniture it does contain make up the entire world of the chronic invalid. There is a specially raised iron bedstead with a lifting bar above it to assess Blanche's restricted movements. A bedside table with a pile of books on it and a little desk that has no chair serves both as writing desk and dining table. Blanche shifts in her chair, the characters on the screen arousing her to a more active interest. Her expression takes on the anguished concern of the expert who sees something being done inadequately.
Oh, no. He should have held that shot until I was right off screen. I told him that when I read the script. And also, I told him again when we had started shooting. But no.
She shakes her head with wry amusement. Then, watching the screen again, she smiles to herself as if to say, just the same, it's all a pretty good picture. Jane Hudson is sitting on the edge of her bed, drinking from a glass tumbler. There is no bottle in sight, but her reaction to its taste suggests the drink is alcoholic. Her bed is huge and covered with extremely feminine satin quilting. Sitting on the pillow is a big baby Jane doll surrounded by a forest of soft animals and smaller dolls. An emasculated Disney-like fawn nuzzles the big doll's glazed cheek. By wearing childish, fussy clothes, using heavy, unfashionable makeup, and surrounded herself with the articles of her youth, Jane has tried hard to arrest the process of growing old, but has only exceeded in achieving the reverse. The thrilling clothes accentuate her years, and the heavily caked makeup gives her appearance of a sad, tired clown whose bewildered and occasionally angry eyes are constantly at variance with the painted mask they peer out of. The sound of the television program from Blanche's room along the gallery. Jane frowns, finishes off her drink, and reaches down to the shelf in the bedside cupboard for the bottle. She pours the last drops into the tumbler, swallows them, and gets up. Blanche is still watching the screen. The movie is in its final scenes as the music begins to swell up. Jane is heard approaching along the gallery. Blanche looks up, briefly distracted. Still holding her empty glass, Jane is heading towards the stairs, evidently in search of more drink. As she reaches Blanche's door, she hears the music that is swelling up. Jane pauses to listen for a moment, and then with a look of angry determination, goes to open the door of Blanche's bedroom. As the door bursts open and Jane stands there for a moment in silent anger, Blanche is startled and confused as Jane moves into the room and goes straight towards the television set.
Jane, what are you?
Jane switches off the set and starts out of the room again.
Jane, I was watching.
Then you're an idiot.
I won't have you speak to me like that.
Jane has not even stopped to listen. She goes out and slams the door with a thunderous crash that cuts off Blanche's words and sends the parakeet screeching into the air to settle again in a flurry of feathers as the echoes reverberate through the house. Hold on Blanche's anguished reaction. There. In contrast to the rest of the Hudson house, the kitchen is a relatively modern, anonymous room with most of the equipment that any Californian housewife might think necessary. But it is in a state of slovenly disorder. Jane, looking bleary and unkempt and wearing a housecoat, is preparing breakfast on a tray. In spite of her dowdy appearance, Jane's preparation of the breakfast tray is carried out with the clinical precision of someone suffering from a compulsion neurosis. The toast, the cutlery, the cup and plates are all lined up with military symmetry, and Jane pours orange juice into a glass with as much care as if it were medicine until it reaches just the right level. As she places the glass on the tray, the back doorbell rings. She goes to open the door and finds herself facing a mailman holding a special delivery letter package.
Miss Hudson?
Well, that's right. Miss Jane Hudson.
Oh, this will be for your sister then.
I'll take it.
Sure. Thank you.
Jane just nods, unwilling to speak. The mailman has already turned away when Jane catches sight of something off screen. Mrs. Bates is crossing the open ground between her house and the Hudsons. She is carrying a large bunch of flowers. Jane steps back from the door and makes a touching but ineffectual effort to straighten out her appearance. When the bell rings, she acts out of business and just having heard as if she had not known it was going to ring. Jane opens the door with a genuine gesture of welcome, believing for a moment that the flowers are really for her.
Good morning, Miss Hudson. I hope I'm not intruding, but I just couldn't resist cutting these flowers for your sister after seeing her show last night.
Thank you.
Jane makes no effort to take them.
You must both be very proud of her new success. I mean, on television.
Jane's reply is no more than mumble, and she still makes no attempt to take the flowers.
Well, I can't tell you how nice it is to be seeing all of her old pictures like this.
I'll tell her you said so.
I'm sure my daughter would just love to meet her someday. Maybe she'd...
My sister never leaves the house, Mrs. Bates. You'll have to excuse her. She's not really fit to receive visitors.
I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't know. Well, anyway, I hope she likes the flowers.
She holds out the flowers and Jane takes them with an abrupt, graceless gesture.
Yes, I'll tell her. Thanks.
Jane shuts the door quickly and stands there for a moment, tense and trembling. As she moves towards the kitchen table, a buzzer is set in the wall above her, shrills loudly. Jane's head jerks up and she glares at the ceiling. On the verge of tears, she spits out two words, the first of which is drowned by a further ringing of the buzzer.
You.
Camera cuts away from her face as if averting gaze from something sad and oddly indecent. Blanche's hand with the forefinger pressed hard down on a bell push. Blanche is just taking her hand from the bell push by her bed. She turns and wheels herself to the half-open door where she listens for a moment as if expecting some violent reaction. Getting nothing but silence, she wheels herself away to the birdcage in the middle of the room where a gently teasing finger, she starts a quiet, companionable conversation with the bird. Carrying the breakfast tray, Jane uses her back to push open the swinging door from the kitchen and then slops across the hall in her slippers. The hall is large and gloomy. The main telephone is on a table near the front door, which can be seen from the stairs that lead up to the gallery on the second floor, where the master bedrooms are located. Jane climbs the long stairs with a laborious waddle, reminiscent of the child she used to be. Reaching the top, she heads for Blanche's room, which is in the center of the gallery, overlooking the hall. Hearing Jane's slippers flopping along the gallery, Blanche turns to face her as she enters.
I'm sorry, Jane. I didn't mean to ring you for my breakfast. I was just wondering who those people were at the door.
Wasn't anything, just that Mrs. Bates going on about the show last night.
Oh, really? What did she say?
She said she liked it.
Well, of course it had a tremendous reception when it came out. I remember most critics described it as exquisite.
Do you remember what year you made that picture?
Oh, surely you remembered that. It was 34, right after I did Moonglow.
Yeah, that's right. I made a picture that year too, remember?
Yes. Wasn't that the comedy, the one that Lloyd directed?
No, it wasn't. It was a love story with Grayson, The Longest Night. Marty McDonald said it was the best thing I ever did. The studio never even released it in America.
Yes. I remember Feldman telling me how upset he was. The studio had a bad year and they couldn't.
No, they couldn't. They had a great year. They just didn't want to show my film, and they were too busy giving the big buildup to that stuff that you were turning out.
Jane stares at her sister as if daring her to argue, but Blanche drops her eyes, and after a moment, Jane's manner reverts to its normal, slightly abstracted level. She walks over to the birdcage and lifts it up with brutal carelessness, as if there were nothing inside it.
I'll clean out the cage.
Somewhere downstairs, a door is unlocked, opened and closed again firmly.
Oh, that'll be Edna.
Edna?
Well, of
Blanche.
course, dear. It's Friday, isn't it?
Yeah.
She leaves the room carrying the birdcage. Blanche waits for a moment, and after the door is closed, wheels herself over to her dressing table and starts to comb and brush her hair with peculiarly tender care and attention. As Jane moves across the hall with the birdcage, the kitchen door opens and Edna Stitt comes out. Edna, the cleaning woman, is in her early 30s. She has a calm, handsome, dignified face with widely spaced, tranquil eyes that have the peculiar quality of appearing to absorb and understand everything they see, and at the same time remain completely uncommittal. Thus, what other people think they see in her face is often nothing more than a reflection of their own fears and bad conscience. At this moment, there is a contained anger in her movements, which is emphasized by the start of surprise she shows on seeing Jane, who brushes past her into the kitchen without speaking. Edna gazes after her for a moment and then purposefully for the stairs. Blanche is going through some papers at her desk when there is a knock at the door.
Come in. Hello, Edna. How are you today?
Fine.
Did you see Jane?
Uh-huh.
I don't think she's feeling too well this morning.
Edna draws herself up as if she were going to endorse Blanche's comment with some force, but then she changes her mind and asks a question.
Did you speak to Dr. Shelby about Miss Jane like he's promised?
Well, no, I haven't yet. It's a little difficult. I mean, I don't want to upset her again if I can help it.
I know that, Miss Blanche, but she's going to be upset anyways. And the longer you leave it, the worse it's going to be.
I know, but I've been hoping maybe it wouldn't be necessary. I mean, she seems to have been so much better lately.
Edna's skeptical gaze contains a hint of reproof.
It isn't any of my business, but she's drinking again. I guess you know that, don't you?
No. Well, that is, I hadn't noticed. Anyway, I don't think it does her any real harm. You see, Edna, I think I understand her.
You do, huh? Well, I think maybe you ought to see this.
She takes a big bundle of letters from her apron pocket and hands them to Blanche.
What are these?
She turns them over in her hand.
I guess this is what you call fan mail.
Blanche smiles, and for a moment reverts to that slightly coy pose which belongs to the great movie star who feigns to be overwhelmed by the interest shown in her.
Oh, how kind people are. You read them.
I guess you better see them for yourself. Then you can tell me if you ever saw them before.
Slightly puzzled by Edna's manner, Blanche selects a letter and is surprised to find that the envelope is already open.
But it's been opened.
That's right, they all have. You'll also find one marked personnel as well.
Blanche unfolds the letter and begins to read, still mystified, but quickly becoming engrossed in the letter itself.
Dear Blanche Hudson, the other night my husband and I watched that lovely old movie of yours, Last Honeymoon. I remember saying to my husband at the time that seeing you again was just like meeting an old friend. Oh, but it's charming, really charming.
Yeah, but the point is you never saw them before, did you?
No.
I didn't think so. Somehow. I'm sorry, but I thought you ought to know.
But I don't understand. Where did they come from? I mean, where did you find them?
In the trash barrel. That's where. I took some old papers out just now and just happened to look. They came from the television station that's showing your old pictures, don't they?
You mean Jane? She may have thought they were just advertising.
Oh, then why she opened the one marked personnel? And what about this? You might as well see that too. It's the envelope that it all came in.
She hands Blanche the big envelope of the special delivery package.
Other side.
Blanche turns the envelope and the words that jump up to her shock her with the abrupt force of a slap in the face.
Writing dirty words like that, I don't even want to remember when I last saw something like that written down.
But I don't understand, Edna. Why'd it make her do a thing like this?
You know what makes her do things like that? She's sick. She's not getting any better. Fact is, just this last month, she's been getting a lot worse.
Blanche looks away quickly as if overwhelmed by some sudden intuitive fear. Mistaking Blanche's sudden withdrawal for disbelief, Edna tries to press her point.
If you don't believe me, how come you're selling this house and planning to move out?
You said a month. She's been getting worse this last month? Do you think she knows?
About selling the house? Why should she? You don't have anything written down.
But she's my sister, Edna. We know each other.
Troubled by Blanche's vague, intuitive mood, Edna is anxious to keep their conversation on a practical level.
I think she's just jealous because of those movies of yours they've been showing all week. Anyhow, 6 weeks from now, you're going to have to hand over the house. Then she'll have to know.
But how am I going to tell her, Edna? How?
Well, if you just speak to that Dr. Shelby, maybe he can tell her.
But it should be me. I shouldn't let some stranger tell her a thing like that.
He's a doctor, and she's a sick woman.
But you don't know, Edna. When she was a child, you didn't know her then when she was young.
There's a pain in Edna's expression as she forces her tone to remain practical and unimpressed.
I've seen those pictures she's kept.
No, it wasn't just that she was pretty. She was different. She was alive.
Edna drops her eyes, unable to find an answer. Blanche looks around distractedly to see Jane standing silently in the doorway. Jane's blank, expressionless face provides a terrible contrast to what Blanche has said. There is no telling how long Jane has been standing there or how much she has heard. She just stands there looking at them and finally utters a flat, toneless statement.
I was cleaning the cage. The bird got out.
As Jane moves into the room carrying the empty bird cage.
But where is it?
I told you, it flew away.
The tone of her voice is so uncompromising that Edna turns toward Blanche, expecting her to challenge Jane, but Blanche cannot do it.
Did you let that bird out on purpose, Miss Jane?
Jane flashes a look of intense hatred, but addresses her to reply to Blanche.
I told you once, I was cleaning the cage and it flew straight out the window. I'm sorry.
She slams the empty cage down onto the stand and walks out of the room. As the door closes, Edna turns on Blanche.
She's done that on purpose. Believe me, she did that on purpose.
Never mind. Perhaps he'll come back.
He won't be back. A bird like that is different. He can't live out in the open with the others.
Blanche does not reply. She sits stiffly in her chair, staring into her lap. The events of the morning have frightened her more than she cares to admit.
Edna, you won't change your mind or anything, will you? I mean, about coming to live with me?
You know I don't go back on my word, Miss Blanche. But you're going to have to make up your mind about finding somewhere for Miss Jane, where they can look at her properly.
I have. I've made up my mind. I'm going to call Mr. Shelby today. It's just that I have to be sure I'm doing the right thing for her.
Edna looks at her bowed head with a kind of sad, resigned patience. Kitchen. Jane is rummaging through one of the built-in cupboards that seem to contain nothing but empty liquor bottles. Eventually, she finds a bottle with a few drags left in it, pours it out, and swallows it. With a final glance to check that all the bottles really are completely empty, she turns away and heads for the hall. Jane crosses the hall, picks up the telephone, looks searchingly at the closed door of Blanche's room up on the gallery, and begins to dial.
Hello, is this Johnson's Liquor Department? Yes, this is Miss Hudson. Yes, that's right, Jane Hudson. I need to have you send me some supplies over to the house. What's that? Well, what do you mean you can't make any more orders for me? From my sister?
She's on the verge of flying into a rage, but then she controls herself and speaks normally.
Oh, well, now, see here, I think there must be some mistake. Yes, will you just hold the line? I think you better speak with my sister.
She turns her head away as if there were really someone in the hall with her.
Blanche, would you mind having a word with these people?
Jane pauses, puts down the receiver, picks it up, then speaks back into the phone again, but this time her voice is an uncannily accurate imitation of Blanche's. Only her face, which pulls into a deliberately gross caricature of her sister, betrays the fact that she is impersonating someone.
Hello? Who is this, please? Oh, yes. Mr. Carson. Oh, yes, this is Blanche Hudson. Oh, what seems to be the trouble? Oh, I see. Well, no, I'm afraid there must be some misunderstanding. I certainly didn't mean to suggest that you shouldn't fill orders for her. Well, after all, we do pay our bills, don't we? Yes, fine. Would you please? I'll put her on.
Jane
All right now? Good. Well, anyway, I'd like you to make that half a dozen bottles of scotch, and you'd better make 3 bottles of gin as well. Yes, thank you. Fine. Bye.
She hangs up and turns to see Edna looking down at her from the gallery. There's no telling how long Edna has been standing there. Her expression betrays nothing. She moves along the gallery and starts down the stairs without speaking.
Where are you going?
I just told Miss Blanche I have to go downtown to see a man about jury service or something.
Jury service?
Oh, shoot.
Jane stands quite still, watching Edna cross towards the kitchen. Then as the door closes, she glances up towards Blanche's room and reaches out for the telephone again. Cut to Blanche's bedroom. Blanche has her chair by the bed and is using the lifting bar to raise herself to her feet. Holding tightly to the bar, she struggles into an upright position and looks down at her feet, willing them to move. Painfully and slowly, one slippered foot moves forward a matter of inches. Taking a new grip on the bar, she starts to try and drag the other foot. Somewhere downstairs, a door is closed. Blanche struggles back to her chair and then wheels herself quickly toward the door. She opens the door to the gallery and listens. The house is completely silent. Closing the door again very quickly, Blanche moves back across the room and takes up the telephone and starts to dial. Realizing almost immediately that there is something wrong, Blanche taps the receiver rest up and down. The receiver has been removed from the cradle of the main telephone on the main hall. The sound of Blanche rattling the receiver rest up and down. Fearful and anxious, Blanche lowers the phone and wheels herself to the door. As she opens the door, she hears something that stops her dead. The first bars of "I'm writing to Daddy" echo through the house with a terrible, sweet, nostalgic clarity. It's as if Jane's voice were there of almost 50 years ago. Blanche freezes in an attitude of despair. It is a long, rectangular, barely furnished room in the Hudson house that seems hardly to have changed since the days long ago, when Blanche must have used it to rehearse her parts for the screen. The curtains are drawn, shutting out almost all sunlight. Running along the entire length of one wall is a bar, the kind that ballet dancers use for exercises. In the center of the opposite wall is a large full-length mirror with a single light above it. We see Jane in the shadows. In a far corner, where she stands over the keyboard of a grand piano. Picking out the melody with the fingers of one hand, she sings the simple childish song with an intensity that makes it strangely touching. Partially hidden as she is by the shadows of the long room, we can almost believe that there is a child standing there singing in the dark. But then the song comes to an end and Jane wanders aimlessly towards the light, revealing her shoddy, soiled house dress and tired body. She moves up to the mirror as if unconsciously looking for herself. Seeing her reflection, she looks at it searchingly, then slowly raises her hands and fixes a broad satin ribbon of brilliantly blue in her hair. She ties a bow, strikes a pose, and begins to recite.
Now, when I'm very good and do just as I am told, I'm Mama's little angel. Papa says I'm good as gold. But when I'm very bad and answer back and sass, then Mama says I'm a devil and Pa says I've got my brass.
The coy expression is replaced by one of genuine confusion and distress.
Now, I wish you would tell me, 'cause I'm much too young to know.
She falters and stops, then quite quietly begins to cry like a child. A type of buzzer, a buzzer in every room, lets out two shrill, insistent calls. Still crying silently, Jane looks up at the ceiling, her face very slowly composing itself into rigid lines of anger. She stalks over to the piano, raises the lid to its full extent, then deliberately sends it crashing down onto the keyboard. The resonant, discordant crash echoes and re-echoes through the house. Jane turns back towards the mirror and slowly removes the ribbon from her hair. She talks first to herself and then to the mirror, as if it were her sister.
All right, Blanche Hudson, Miss Movie Star, Miss Big Fat Rotten Actress, just press the button, ring the bell, and the whole world comes running. Is that what you still think? Lunch, Miss Hudson? Why, certainly, Miss Hudson. I'm sure we could find something appropriate for you, Miss Hudson.
Jane's laugh is angry, choking bark. She turns and walks out of the room. Jane comes out of the rehearsal room, crosses the hall, and barges through the swinging door of the kitchen. Blanche again reaches out to the bell push in the wall by the bed, but then thinks better of it. She sits for a moment, nervous and indecisive. Then she snatches up a book from the table and makes a determined effort to concentrate on reading from it. With her back to camera, Jane is preparing a lunch tray on the kitchen table. Her mood appears to have changed again, and now as she works, she is contentedly humming the tune, "I'm Writing to Daddy." Still trying to concentrate on her book, Blanche looks up distractedly, glances at the bell push by the bed, and forces herself to go on reading. We hear the sound of someone crossing the hall toward the stairs and a slight clatter of dishes. Blanche closes her book and starts to compose herself for Jane's entry. At the last moment, she decides that it would look better as if she is reading and at ease. She turns her chair away from the door and opens the book again. Jane enters, carrying a tray with a large metal dish cover on it.
Oh, you've brought my lunch. It's a bit early, isn't it?
Then what were you ringing for?
Blanche hesitates, watching Jane place the lunch tray very precisely on the middle of the desk.
I wanted to tell you there's something wrong with the phone. I think maybe it's been left off the hook downstairs.
Is that so? Who did you want to call, Blanche?
Actually, I wanted to call Bert Hanley, but
Bert Hanley.
yes, Bert Hanley, our business manager. It's something I've been meaning to discuss with you.
Well,
The thing is, I'm afraid I've had some bad news. You know, about money. Well, anyway, the point is Bert Hanley tells me we're probably going to have to sell the house.
why should we have to sell the house, Blanche?
That's just what I'm trying to tell you. Our financial position has gotten to the point where we just can't afford.
You've got plenty of money invested, I know.
Yes, but the trouble is none of those investments have been paying lately, and
When did Bert tell you all this?
why, early last week, I think.
Bert Hanley didn't call here last week. I know that too.
Well, no, we didn't actually talk on the phone. He wrote me a letter.
He didn't write you any letter either. There hasn't been a letter from his office since.
Yes, Jane. Yes, there has.
You're lying, Blanche. You're just a liar.
Jane!
You were always a liar all the time. Bert Hanley never wrote you any letter, and he never called you about selling the house. You called him 4 weeks ago and told him to sell it.
I did nothing of the sort.
Don't you think I know? Don't you think I know everything that goes on in this house?
You've been spying on me. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, what do you think?
You're disgusting. All the things I've done for you, and you pay me back by spying on me, when I'm only trying to help.
Who were you trying to help, Blanche? What were you planning to do with me when you sold the house? You want to tell me that? What'd you have in mind? A nice little place where they could look after me?
Jane dismisses Blanche with a contemptuous sneer and goes to unplug the telephone extension.
I don't think you better tire yourself with the phone anymore. If there's any more calls, I'll take them downstairs.
She moves to the door carrying the phone. Blanche moves as if to speak, but Jane cuts her off in a way which indicates that the subject is closed.
Eat your lunch. It'll get cold.
She goes out and turns towards her bedroom at the end of the gallery. Blanche starts to follow, arriving at the doorway just as the door of Jane's bedroom is slammed. Blanche sighs, unable to face the task of forcing herself into Jane's presence. She turns back into the room and closes the door. Coming up to the little desk, she pauses to admire the lunch tray. As she reaches out for the metal dish cover, she is like a person whose last solace in life is the enjoyment of food. It's as if all that has gone before were momentarily forgotten. She lifts the metal cover. Lying carefully arranged in the middle of a lovingly prepared ring of lettuce is the dead parakeet, its neck broken. The head at a grotesque angle and a rich dab of mayonnaise spattered across the tail. Her stricken reaction as she lets the metal dish cover fall from her hand and it clatters to the floor. Her mouth opens, but for moments, no sound will come. She begins to scream. Long dissolve. The flowers that Mrs. Bates brought for Blanche stand in a vase near the bed. Jane is selecting a coat from the built-in cupboard near her dressing table. Her movements are calm, unhurried, and methodical. She settles on a sadly unsuitable coat with a little fur collar, slips it on, and heads for the door. Jane comes out of her room, closes the door firmly, and makes for the stairs.
Jane? Jane, wait.
Jane walks on past Blanche's door without pausing. Blanche is scrambling at her door, trying to get it open.
Jane, please, listen to me.
Jane moves onto the stairs and down without looking back. Blanche's door opens and she wheels herself rapidly along the gallery to the head of the stairs just in time to see the front door slam. The telephone sits invitingly on the hall table. Jane slides back the garage door, climbs into the bulky dated Cadillac, and drives off. Blanche is still at the head of the stairs, looking down at the telephone and uncertain what to do. Finally, she turns her chair and hurries back toward her room. Mrs. Bates is kneeling by a flower bed against the wall of her house, cutting flowers to make up a bunch. She straightens up and carries her flowers toward her house, glancing up at the window of Blanche's room across the way as she goes. Blanche has maneuvered her chair into a position directly beneath the high window with its heavy ornamented bars. Just avoiding toppling forward out of her chair, she reaches up, grabs the sill, and begins to pull herself up. Jane moves along the Los Angeles sidewalk with a kind of childish confidence, quite unaware of any curious glances from passerby. She looks up at the name over the main entrance of a building and goes in. Mrs. Bates cuts the last flower, straightens up, and starts towards her house, glancing up at the window of Blanche's room across the way as she goes. Blanche changes hands quickly, shifting her grip from the sill to the window frame. Blanche is able to drag herself up the last few inches to the window. Blanche is able to see most of Mrs. Bates' house and the narrow angle of the garden and lawn that run up against the wall of the Hudson house with clear dividing line between the two properties. Blanche looks through the window just in time to see Mrs. Bates opening the French windows of her drawing room and disappearing inside. Realizing that she is too late to be heard, Blanche chokes back a cry for help. Then, suddenly struck by another idea, she starts to lower herself quickly back into her chair. Cut to an advertising department at the newspaper. Jane stands at the counter, behind which a balding elderly clerk in shirt sleeves is sorting papers. He is slow to look up.
I'd like to place an advertisement.
Personal column?
Beg your pardon?
You want it to go in the personal column or the one ads?
Oh, I think personals is nicer, don't you?
That'll be $6.30. Who's placing this ad? We have to know.
Well, I am.
Yeah, I know. I mean, who for? If you're advertising for someone to do a job for you, we have to have your name for the records.
Oh, well, that's right. It's for me. I'm placing it. Jane Hudson. Maybe you remember me? Baby Jane Hudson.
Oh, sure. Who the hell is baby Jane Hudson?
Hold on, clerk, as he turns back again to watch Jane leaving the office. Interior Blanche's bedroom. Blanche sits at her desk typing a letter. She has been typing rapidly now. She stops to read the note over to herself, uncertain whether she has struck the right tone.
Mrs. Bates, this is from your neighbor, Blanche Hudson. I need your help. I'm unable to use my telephone and urgently need to consult my doctor. Please ring Dr. Shelby at OL 61656 and ask him to come here to the house immediately. Please, on no account, let my sister know anything about this.
She rips the paper out from between the rollers and moves quickly toward the window. Exterior Sunset in La Brea. Jane's car slows down and stops at a red light. Jane glances up at the driving mirror and treats herself to a self-satisfied little smile. The lights change and the car moves on. Cut to Mrs. Bates is just coming out into the garden again, where she starts to gather another bunch of flowers. Blanche struggles to pull herself up the last few inches to the window and looks out. Mrs. Bates, with her back to camera, is engrossed with her gardening. Blanche hesitates, summoning up all the courage to call out and perhaps wondering what, in fact, one does shout in such a vaguely ridiculous situation. The sound of an approaching car is heard. Blanche waits a moment longer, then crumpling the note into a tight ball, she throws it out the window as hard as she can and shouts.
Please.
Mrs. Bates straightens up with a puzzled frown and turns around to orient herself. In another moment, she would be looking straight up into camera, but the sound of the approaching car has been increasing in volume, and she turns, realizing that what first attracted her attention must have been Jane's car. Mrs. Bates smiles and moves forward. Blanche's tragic reaction as she realizes that Mrs. Bates is not going to see her and that she is walking straight toward the white ball of notepaper that lies on the lawn. The sound of the engine is cut and the car door slams. Mrs. Bates moves across the lawn towards the garage and steps right in front of Blanche's ball of paper without seeing it.
Oh, Miss Hudson, how nice to see you. I was just going to call you.
Jane comes into view, moving rather belligerently towards Mrs. Bates. They meet on the lawn with the crumpled note lying, still unnoticed, between them.
Why? What's the matter?
She starts to turn, as if to look up at the camera. Blanche ducks back so quickly that she almost falls, pressing her face against the wall. She listens anxiously.
Oh, nothing at all. I just thought I'd ask you about the flowers I brought over for your sister.
Mrs. Bates goes on talking, uneasily aware that Jane is looking not at her, but up at Blanche's window. Blanche's window is empty. The curtain is moving with a faint motion that could be caused by the breeze. Jane turns back to look at Mrs. Bates.
I'm afraid they don't last very long at this time of year, and I thought perhaps you might like some more.
Jane impatiently scuffs the lawn with her foot, kicking out the ball of paper without really being aware of it.
I don't think you should trouble yourself.
Oh, really? It's no trouble. I've been cutting some now. That's why I came over.
Jane bends down, picks up the scrap of paper and starts slowly straightening it out in her hands. Jane reads the typewritten note without showing any reaction. Mrs. Bates prattles on.
I always think it's nice to have flowers in the house. It makes a room so much more cheerful, specifically a sick room. I mean, when there's an invalid in the house.
Mrs. Bates' voice trails away as she watches Jane read the note. Jane's head comes up with an angry jerk.
Mrs. Bates, if my sister really needed flowers, I guess we could afford to buy them.
She turns on her heel and walks away, leaving Mrs. Bates speechless. Interior Blanche's bedroom. Blanche still has her face pressed up against the wall and is listening with increasing fear. The sound of the back door to the kitchen is slammed hard. Blanche jerks involuntarily and lowers herself slowly into her chair, and then with great difficulty once again pulls herself up to the window to look out. The driveway is deserted. The ball of paper is no longer in evidence. Blanche is confused and bewildered and completely unaware of what has happened and who may now have her note. Very slowly, her face disappears below the ledge of the window. Jane strips off her coat, hangs it on the back door, takes a tray and slams it down angrily on the table. Then she turns away to start sorting out crockery for a meal. Still upset by her meeting with Jane, Mrs. Bates enters the living room through the French windows of the garden. Liza Bates looks up from the sofa.
What's the matter, Mother? You look like you've been in a fight.
I'm not sure that I haven't been. That Jane Hudson gets me so mad I could kill her.
Gee, that's a great idea. What should we use?
Mrs. Bates looks at her sharply, only half aware that a joke was intended. Close up, Jane's face is devoid of all expression as she moves forward like some painted robot. Jane advances toward camera carrying a tray that is covered by a very white linen cloth. She stops in front of Blanche's room and opens the door. Jane. The lunch tray with metal dish cover is still in its place on the desk. Camera swings away to a close shot of Blanche, who cowers back in her chair against the far wall. Jane moves into the room, places the fresh tray on the desk, and picks up the metal dish cover on the old tray to look at what may still be on the plate. Jane's back is shielding the plate from camera, but the dead bird is presumably still there, and Jane shrugs her shoulders in a matter-of-fact manner as if to say, "What a waste." She replaces the dish cover, picks up the tray, and starts to leave. Blanche, who has been waiting fearfully for an explosion of some kind, now realizes that Jane intends to leave the room without uttering a word. Rather than suffer further uncertainty, Blanche forces herself to speak.
Did you have a nice drive?
What are you talking about?
Nothing, dear. It's just that it's been such a long time since you were out of the house. I thought perhaps you'd been out for a drive or something.
Jane does not bother to reply, but stands there waiting as if she knew there were more to come. Blanche manages to force a smile.
You know, I've just been thinking. It's an awful long time since we had a real talk together. I mean, about the future and everything.
Jane puts the tray back on the table and waits with a kind of martyred patience of someone expecting to be told a lie.
I mean, I didn't want you to be worried about the house, because even if I have to sell it, we'd still live together and...
You're not going to sell the house, Blanche. My father bought this house, and he bought it for me. You don't like to remember that, do you?
No, you're wrong, Jane. You've forgotten. Father died before we ever saw this house. I bought it for the two of us when I signed my first contract.
I can't remember anything. But there's a whole lot of things I remember. And you never paid for this house. Baby Jane Hudson made the money that paid for this house. That's who.
You don't know what you're saying.
You aren't ever going to sell this place, Blanche. And we aren't ever going to leave it either.
Blanche hesitates, but when Jane moves to pick up the tray again, she forces herself to say something that will stop Jane from going.
Jane, do you remember when I first came home after the accident?
The effect is immediate. Jane leans weakly against the table and seems to break into tears.
You said we would never talk about that again. You promised.
I know I did. But you see, I'm in this chair now, Jane. After all those years, I'm still in this chair. And that gives you some kind of responsibility, doesn't it?
No, Blanche, you promised.
But Jane, I'm only trying to explain the way things are. And if I weren't in this chair, you wouldn't be able to do those awful things to me.
Blanche waits for her words to take effect, but she's suddenly defeated by her own logic. Jane's pathetic expression is suddenly transformed into a quick, bright smile as she seizes onto a childishly simple thought.
But you are, Blanche. You are in the chair.
Jane, you don't know what you're saying.
But you just said it yourself. So tell me, what are these awful things I'm supposed to be doing to you?
I didn't mean, I meant you wouldn't have to work so hard. And I was just thinking maybe we ought to have Edna come in more often, maybe live with us.
We don't need Edna.
But you get so tired. There's so much for you to do, and you're not well.
Well, maybe you're right. Maybe I should have a checkup or something.
I'm sure it'd be good for you. We could get some really good doctor, someone who...
We could even get that nice Dr. Shelby, couldn't we? Let's see now. What's his number again?
The realization that Jane has deliberately been playing with her is too much for Blanche, and she raises her hands as if to hide her face. Jane's smile vanishes. She picks up the old lunch tray and goes to the door, pausing briefly for her parting shot.
It's not me that needs a doctor, Blanche.
She leaves the room, closes the door. Blanche's gaze flies straight to the fresh tray on the table. The beautifully laundered cloth is draped over the tray, making a white, clinical outline that is both bulky and sinister. Blanche skims across the room in her chair, determined to stifle her fear. Reaching the table, she raises her hand to lift the cloth and stops dead without touching it. Her hand remains poised for a moment and then falls uselessly into her lap. Fighting back her desire to cry, she sets herself for another effort, but this one fails more quickly than the first. Letting out a quick, harsh sob, She whirls her chair around and moves rapidly to the far corner of the room before turning to look at the tray again. The light is fading quickly and the white cloth begins to take on a luminous quality as night falls and the room dissolves to darkness. Long dissolve, Flagg's apartment studio. Shooting over the top of an upright piano, camera starts on close shot of Edwin Flagg, peering short-sightedly through his thick lenses of the music rack in front of him, whilst his left hand picks out a series of tentative, absent-minded notes on a keyboard. Although he is only 30, the soft, fleshy folds of Edwin's unlovely face make him look older. Still staring at the music rack with his pale, watery eyes, Edwin reaches out with his right hand, picks up a ballpoint pen, and raises it as if to mark his score. The apartment, an exact replica of a dozen others that form a side street court, has the forlorn appearance of the kind prefabricated housing estates that were once put up in the great Speed and Culver City and then promptly forgotten. The central concrete sidewalk is cracked and uneven with weeds creeping onto it from dry, neglected flower beds around it. The occasional pedestrians flit about like silent gray shadows in a deserted town. The faint tinkling of Edwin's piano is heard. Edwin's mother, Delia Flagg, a dowdy elderly woman with stringy gray hair and a rabbity old overcoat, is moving towards the front door of her apartment. She has the tired, long-suffering appearance of someone who has martyred themselves for a lost cause and enjoyed every miserable minute of it. Delia Flagg takes the key from her purse, pauses with a proud little smile to listen to the piano, and lets herself into the apartment. Still stroking the notes with his left hand, Edwin puts down his pen, reaches out to a small table at his side, and comes back with a thick, juicy sandwich. What Edwin has been looking at and marking is not a music score, but the personal column of a newspaper on which he has drawn two thick circles around one ad. He chews thoughtfully on his sandwich like someone who eats for the sake of comfort rather than sustenance.
Hello, dear.
In spite of her years in the States, Delia Flagg's voice retains the characteristic whining twang of a Cockney Londoner. Edwin's hand drops from the keyboard and he spins around on his music stool with an expression of anxiety and irritation to see his mother standing in the doorway.
Don't stop for me, dear.
Edwin speaks with a sympathetic, synthetic, genteel British accent, which his moments of stress is liable to slur back to his native American. He ignores his mother's remark and fires a question.
Well, what did the doctor say?
He says it's no use you trying to go back to work for another 6 months.
Didn't he even give you anything to take?
No, he says it's arthritis, and the only thing to do is to try and not work until it clears up.
Did he suggest what we should use for money in the meantime?
No, dear, but he's ever such a nice man. Anyway, never mind. We've still got a bit of savings.
Edwin's expression is one of pained disgust. As he turns away on his stool, his mother takes the opportunity of peeping over his shoulder.
Oh, that's nice. You found something then, have you?
You don't have to get excited. You haven't even seen what it is yet.
Delia reaches over her son's shoulder to get the paper. He squirms away from the momentary physical contact.
No, but it's a possibility, isn't it? I mean, there aren't all that many jobs that will be suitable. I mean, to say for someone with your qualifications.
What qualifications?
Well, you know, serious music and that.
But this sounds just like the ticket, doesn't it?
He hurls himself away from the piano and paces up and down, looking at the ceiling as if he were seeking salvation from this pathetic, doting old woman. Still holding the paper, Delia watches him for a moment and then speaks very meekly.
You're going to call?
Call who?
Well, people.
Might as well.
What now?
Well, it wouldn't be a lot of bloody use calling next week, would it?
As he goes on pacing the floor and glancing nervously at the telephone, which stands on a cheap little ornamental table, he suddenly becomes the helpless, dependent child again. He turns and leans across the table towards his mother with an outrageously coaxing smile.
I'll tell you what, you ring for me. Tell them that you're my secretary or something.
No, all right, dear, I'll do that. I won't let on who I am. I'll just tell him I'm Mr. Flagg's secretary.
She
You
folds
know.
the newspaper.
You know, I believe your old mom would make a jolly good secretary.
Edwin stands by the telephone, biting his lip as Delia reaches out for the receiver. Interior Hudson House. The telephone on the hall table is ringing. Jane moves into frame to answer it.
Hello? Yes, that's correct. This is Miss Hudson. Oh, yes, about the advertisement. Who is this speaking? I see his secretary. Well, certainly. I'll be glad to have Mr. Flagg an appointment. But let me see now. What about this evening? Say around 5? How's that? Fine. I'll be expecting him then. Thank you. Goodbye.
She hangs up smiling, only to look up furiously a moment later as the buzzer from Blanche's room begins to echo around the house. Blanche's room. Blanche takes her finger from the bell push by her bed and pauses to listen. Hearing no kind of response, she presses the bell again, long and hard.
Stop that.
Blanche turns quickly to see Jane standing in the doorway.
What do you want?
Who is that on the phone?
None of your business. What were you ringing for?
I'm hungry, Jane.
Of course you're hungry. You didn't eat your dinner last night, and that's why you're hungry.
But you forgot my breakfast.
I didn't forget your breakfast. I didn't bring you any breakfast because you didn't eat your dinner. You know, I was thinking, we're right back where we started. Huh. When I was on the stage, you had to depend on me for everything. Even the food you ate came from me, remember? You never thanked me for that either, did you? And now you even have to depend on me for your food again. You see? We're right back where we started.
Why are you doing this to me? Why?
Doing what, Blanche?
Making me afraid to eat, trying to make me starve myself.
Don't be silly. If you starved, you'd die. I don't know what you're talking about. You really must be sick.
Jane, have you ever stopped to think that if something happened to me, I mean, something bad, there wouldn't be any money because I wouldn't be there to sign the checks. And you wouldn't even get to your pocket money.
Yes, I have thought of that. Now, why didn't you eat dinner?
I was afraid, Jane. You made me afraid.
Huh. I thought you were supposed to be the big girl in this family.
Jane goes across to the tray, lifts up the cloth contemptuously, and takes a plump, clean-looking chop in her hand.
There's nothing wrong with this, Blanche.
She takes a healthy bite and chews.
You're just a neurotic, Blanche. Did you know that? You're just a neurotic.
Well, maybe I could have some of it now.
Jane glances distractedly at Blanche, shakes her head no, then turns back to the window. Liza Bates sits on the back steps of her house. She is going through the business of combing out the family Cocker Spaniel. She waves, silently mouths something unheard in a morning greeting. Blanche slowly moves her chair in Jane's direction.
Please, Jane. I'm hungry.
Jane turns back from the window and steals a stealthy look at her watch. Then she turns and hurries across the room towards the dining desk.
No, I have to go now.
Jane picks up the tray.
Just a little.
No, you didn't want it last night, so you'll just have to wait until it's lunchtime.
She goes out quickly and closes the door behind her. Blanche turns her chair in a complete circle, her eyes searching the room as if to find some way of escape, some means of calming her desperation. Jane bursts into the kitchen to find Edna already taking off her coat.
Hello, Edna.
Well, good morning.
Jane puts down the tray.
I saw you coming up the drive and I wanted to talk to you.
I see.
Jane is quickly feeling her way into the part she has decided to play. She picks her purse and turns to Edna with real humility.
Yes, I wanted to apologize. I mean about yesterday.
Apologize?
Yes, I wasn't feeling too good yesterday and I was a bit unkind, wasn't I? Well, anyway, I just want to make up for it today. And so I got up so early and fixed the house and everything so you could have the day off.
Well, I don't know.
Jane digs into her purse and comes out with a $5 bill, which she offers to Edna. There is nothing patronizing in her gesture because she has genuinely made herself believe in the part she is playing, and it is this that eventually convinces Edna as well.
Look, here's $5.
Does this Blanche know?
Oh, it's not from Blanche. I saved it out of my own allowance. So why don't you go to the beach for the day or something?
Well, thank you. What I meant was, does Miss Blanche know about taking the day off?
Well, yes, I told her. She said it was a nice idea.
Even now, Edna is a bit doubtful and reluctant, but she cannot refuse the money without hurting Jane's feelings.
Well, if you say so.
I do.
Edna takes the money and stuffs it awkwardly into her pocket of her coat, which she has now over her arm. Jane is edging her towards the door.
I'll see you next week then. Is that right?
That's right. You come in next week sometime.
I'll do that.
Bye now. Have a good time.
Bye, and thank you.
Jane smiles, ushers her out, and closes the door. Blanche looks up sharply as she hears the door slam in the kitchen below. She wheels herself across the room, opens the door, and listens anxiously. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen is heard. Blanche closes the door, moves over to the bed, starts the slow, painful business of lifting herself with the aid of the bar, and tries to move forward on her feet. The fear and hunger of the past few days is already beginning to show in her face and in her movements. Jane is shaking out freshly laundered linen cloth. As she floats the cloth over the lunch tray that has been prepared for the kitchen table, the camera follows the cloth without ever quite seeing what has finally come down to the cover. Jane lifts the tray and goes to the door. Blanche has succeeded in moving along the edge of her bed until she is a foot or two away from her chair. The sound of Jane's footsteps on the stairs is heard. Blanche panics and tries feverishly to regain the safety of her chair. Jane comes along the gallery, reaches the door, and enters without knocking. Blanche collapses into her chair just as Jane appears in the doorway. Jane moves into the room without appearing to have noticed Blanche's frantic movements. Still frightened but drawn almost against her will by the loaded tray, Blanche follows Jane across the room.
Who was that at the door?
Edna.
Edna. But what's she doing then? Is she down in the kitchen?
No, I gave her the day off.
Blanche seems about to remonstrate, but then thinks better of it. Jane puts the tray down on the table and goes on pleasantly chatting as she moves around the room, putting things in order and never really looking at Blanche.
Yes, I think we give Edna a pretty hard time considering. I told her she should come back next week.
She finishes her work and pauses in the doorway whilst Blanche waits impatiently for her to go so she can examine her lunch tray. Jane turns to go, then almost as an afterthought looks straight at Blanche and asks a question.
Blanche, do you know we have rats in the cellar?
She goes out and closes the door without waiting for an answer or appearing to register Blanche's incredulous reaction. Blanche starts to follow Jane to ask for an explanation, but quickly changes her mind and moves back toward the tray on the desk. She is scurrying back and forth like a trapped animal that knows it is doomed, but stricken with terror, she does not know where the final blow is coming from. Blanche stops in front of the tray and finally forces herself to take hold of the cloth that covers it. Then, very carefully, and ready to let it fall again at any moment, she pulls the cloth away from the tray. A large plate with a circle of sliced tomatoes surrounding a freshly tossed green salad. Blanche relaxes and smiles. It is only when she reaches out to take a leaf of lettuce that she begins to sense that there is something odd or unusual about the way in which this salad has been heaped to form a mound in the middle of the plate. Suddenly anxious, she snatches away a handful of lettuce from the top. Resting there, as if in its nest, is a dead mouse in a trap. The steel spring has broken the animal's neck, partially flattening it, so the flesh has been squeezed back to form an obscenely plump bulge within the loose, furry skin of the body. Blanche screams and sweeps the tray off the table. The plate smashes to the floor. Edwin Flagg enters the gate at the bottom of the drive and looks at the house. The house lies silent and apparently deserted in the late afternoon sun. Edwin closes the gates with timid care and starts up the drive. Jane is seated at the kitchen table with a glass and bottle in front of her. She is elaborately overdressed in a bright, velvety creation that has all bits and pieces of lace and fussy bows. Her hair is done up with a ribbon, and her face is plastered with makeup. Jane takes a swallow from her glass and looks up at the clock, which shows precisely 5. She takes another quick, nervous swig. Then, just as she is putting down her glass, the doorbell rings. Jane lurches to her feet and hurries out of the room. Edwin is waiting uneasily on the doorstep. He mops his glistening face with a rather soiled handkerchief, with which he then starts to wipe his hands. He is just looking yearningly back down the drive when the door opens and he turns to be confronted by Jane. Jane's face is contorted in a manner that is intended to convey a gracious welcome. It begins to collapse, or rather unfold into something like disappointment. Neither Edwin or Jane can quite believe that they are facing the person that they were supposed to meet.
Good afternoon.
Hello, I'm Edwin Flagg. I have an appointment with a Miss Jane Hudson for 5 o'clock.
Well, you're right on time, aren't you?
Yes, I believe I am.
Well, come on in. I'm Miss Hudson, Jane Hudson.
Oh, really?
Flustered by his obviously unsuitable reaction, Edwin lurches forward and holds out his hand, realizing too late that he is still holding his grubby handkerchief. He stuffs it into his pocket and tries again. They shake hands.
Come in.
Edwin follows her into the house. Jane closes the front door and hesitates in an agony of indecision like a young girl on her first date.
Perhaps we should, perhaps you'd like to go into the living room. You could, or we could talk there.
Certainly.
She leads the way unsteadily across the hall and they enter the living room where Edwin stands by the sofa and looks around the room with self-conscious interest.
I say, what a perfectly charming room.
He lowers himself cautiously onto the sofa and Jane sits down on the edge of a chair facing him. There's a long pause.
So you're Mr. Flagg?
That's right.
Edwin Flagg. Well, now I guess I should offer you something. Yes, why don't I go and fix us some tea? Do you like tea, Mr. Flagg?
Oh, yes, I'm very fond of tea.
She starts off across the room, so Edwin has to call after her.
You must have guessed that I'm English.
Oh, really? Well, how nice.
She goes out, leaving him to look uneasily around the room. Cut to Blanche's room. Blanche has the door of her room open and is listening. but all she can hear are some vague sounds from the kitchen. She wheels herself quietly out of the room and along the gallery to the stairs. Edwin has gotten up and is inspecting the room more minutely. Pausing in front of the enormous empty fireplace, he looks up at the expensive silver picture frame that hangs above it. Only the glass and the cardboard backing remain. The picture is gone. Edwin puzzles over this for a moment, then shrugging his shoulders, moves towards the door. Blanche sits at the head of the stairs listening. She can see a large part of the hall and the front door, but the doors to the kitchen and the living room lie away from her sight. The sound of Edwin opening the living room door and coming out into the hall is heard. Blanche strains forward. Edwin shuffles along the hall with timid curiosity, not at all sure of his bearings. The rattle of silverware is heard from the kitchen. Edwin turns to look in the direction of the kitchen, but then hearing nothing further, starts off slowly along the hall again, looking minutely at the rich furnishings and pictures as if to estimate their cash value. Blanche can now quite definitely hear that someone is moving slowly towards the foot of the stairs and that they will therefore come into view at any moment. She is ready to call out, but dares not do so until she could be sure of knowing who it is. Edwin stops in front of a picture and is just staring to move on again, when the kitchen door swings open and Jane comes out carrying a heavily laden tray. Edwin turns to face her and they look at each other for a moment. Blanche is holding the newel post at the head of the stairs, leaning forward as far as she dares.
Here, let me help you. That's a terribly big burden for such a little girl.
Why, thank you. You are very kind.
As she hears Edwin's footsteps moving away down the hall again, Blanche reacts with bitter disappointment. Edwin comes into the room, followed by Jane, puts the tray down with silver tea service on the table in front of the sofa and sits down. Jane bends down clumsily and starts to pour.
It's hot today. You must be tired driving out here.
Well, actually, I took a cab. It's a bit of a nuisance, but I had to put my car in for servicing.
I think it's nice to break bread with strangers, don't you?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. Here, let me help you.
Jane smiles graciously. They both sit down. Edwin glances around the room, searching for a subject of conversation as he balances the teacup precariously on his knee.
I don't think you actually mentioned the exact nature of your...
My act? Well, to tell you the truth, I have been retired for quite a while now. There was some family trouble. I had to look for someone, have to look after someone who was sick. But now
you're free to return to your profession?
Yes. Well, that is, I expect to be free in a few days, maybe a week.
I see. And what exactly, I mean, I take it you're a soloist, some instrument?
I wonder if you can guess.
I don't know. I mean, can you give me a hint?
Oh, it's not fair to make you guess like that. I'll tell you. I'm Baby Jane Hudson.
Baby... Well, I never... You mean you're really the Baby Jane Hudson?
Yes, I am too. I'm going to revive my act, just the way I used to do it, exactly. Of course, some of the arrangements need to be brought up to date. Music changes so much, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, but they're all just, they're desperate for new acts, or, television, Las Vegas, all the clubs. There's still an awful bunch, a lot of people who remember me, lots of them. And after all, there's a whole bunch of old timers that have come back, aren't there?
I don't see how you could fail.
I have this feeling about you, a kind of feeling. The minute I opened the door and saw you standing there, I knew that you were going to turn out to be friends. I was just thinking about costumes.
Costumes?
Yes, I've taken all my old ones down to be copied. Don't you think that's a good idea?
Well, of course. I don't quite remember.
No, of course. How could you? But I want your opinion, Edwin. I really do. Before you came, I put all of my pictures and stuff out in the rehearsal room so you can look at them and tell me what you think.
She gets up and holds out her hand to him. Edwin has no alternative but to take her hand and let her lead him from the room. As she crosses the floor, Jane is doing something very like skipping with pleasure.
Would like to see the pictures, wouldn't you?
Of course.
Oh, I wish Daddy could be here right now. You can never lose your talent, he used to say. You can lose everything else, but you can never lose your talent.
Jane passes through the door into the hall, pulling Edwin behind her like a fat, hairless teddy bear. Jane leads Edwin into the rehearsal room, moving straight across to the piano.
My scrapbook's on the piano here. You see all the pictures.
She picks the big leather-bound volume off the piano and opens it for Edwin, who looks cautiously at the first picture and reacts with pained incredulity. The first picture is a full-page photograph of baby Jane at the age of 7. She is looking up at the camera, one finger pointed daintily at her chin, and her eyes smiling with a coy guile that would do credit to a 20-year-old.
I always liked that first one. It's so, I don't know, sad.
Before Edwin is forced to comment, they are interrupted by the loud, insistent shrilling of the buzzer from Blanche's room. Jane turns angrily. It is about to say something fierce, but then controls herself enough to give Edwin an apologetic smile.
I'm sorry, you'll have to excuse me.
Yes, of course.
As Jane exits, Edwin turns and goes on examining the scrapbook, leafing through it with increasing astonishment and dismay. Edwin looks up nervously at the buzzer on the wall, which keeps on ringing. He puts down the scrapbook and turns his attention to the piano bench, which he opens to find stacked with sheet music. He bends down to pick up a manuscript when something else catches his eye, and he straightens up, holding a photograph. Clearly visible beneath the vicious slashes of red crayon with which the picture has been attacked is a photograph of Blanche Hudson as she appeared in one of her films. Edwin stares at the picture with something like fear, then slowly turns in bewildered confusion at the empty picture frame atop the mantle. The constant ringing of the buzzer stops abruptly. Jane is wrenching Blanche's arm away from the bell push, causing the wheelchair to spin around, roll back, and hit the wall. Jane raises her hand as if to strike.
You always have to try and spoil everything, don't you?
Blanche cowers back, searching for words, anything that will avert the hand that is raised threateningly above her head.
No, please, Jane, I only wanted to know.
Who's down there? That's what you want to know. Well, I'll tell you. I have got a friend down there, someone who's come to see me. He doesn't even know that you exist. You don't like that, do you?
You're wrong, Jane. I want you to have friends. That's what I always wanted for you. Really.
Well, how come I never had any then?
I guess maybe you weren't. Maybe you were just too independent.
No, that wasn't it. You always stopped me. That's why. You always tried to stop me from having friends. Anything I wanted.
Not anymore, Jane. Really, not anymore. I'm pleased you've got a friend. That's what you need. I was just hoping maybe I could meet him. That'd be nice. We could have a nice talk, just the three of us.
You like that, wouldn't you? Then maybe you could tell him a whole lot of lies about me like you did with the others. Scare him off, or maybe have him all to yourself.
She cuts off Blanche's protest with a stinging blow across the face. Edwin, the object of the sisters' quarrel, is looking anything but desirable. He has sat himself down at the piano and is snuffling asthmatically amongst the sheet music on the rack. The covers of all the scores feature baby Jane in various coy attitudes and situations. Edwin finds a particularly odious one where baby Jane sits at a little desk. A thick pencil is poised in her chubby fist, and she is looking skyward as if to search for inspiration for the note she is composing. Edwin opens the score and begins to play. Tentatively at first, but quickly regaining confidence as he masters the simple tune. Becoming engrossed in this exercise, he fails to notice Jane as she moves quietly back into the room and comes to stand behind him at the piano. Jane starts to sing, and Edwin looks around startled, but saying that she is hardly aware of him. He turns back and goes on playing.
Oh, the postman, he won't mind, 'cause Mama says that heaven's near. Though you've left us both behind, I'm writing, Daddy dear. I love you.
The song comes to an end. Jane is twittering with delighted embarrassment.
Well, you certainly can play, can't you, Edwin?
And you certainly can sing.
I can see that you've done this kind of work before.
Oh, no, not really. Actually, I've spent most of my time on serious music, composing and that sort of thing.
You mean this would really be your first contact with show business?
Well, not exactly. You see, my father was quite well known as an actor.
How nice. Was he in movies? Perhaps I even worked with him.
Oh, I shouldn't think so. I mean, he's been dead quite a long time now.
I know how you feel. I lost my father when I was quite young.
They begin to talk to each other in this manner of lonely people who are eager to pour out their hearts and are quite content to bask in the glow of mutual sympathy without really troubling to listen to what the other person is saying.
Of course, he was more in the classical tradition. I mean, as an actor, Shakespeare and that sort of thing,
He used to say my father could have been a real success in his own right. But he was a musician too, you know.
Oh, really? What instrument?
The banjo.
Oh, that's interesting. Very Native American. Of course, my father was British, but he never really got a chance out here in Hollywood. It's funny, really, because actually he came from a rather distinguished family, socially, I mean, and nearly all of the parts he had were playing menials, butlers, and that kind of thing.
Oh, gee, that's too bad.
Yes, my mother never really appreciated him. I mean, what he was trying to do.
I know what you mean. It's very hard for an artist when people don't understand. I remember.
I sometimes try to explain to her that if you're going to produce anything decent in a way of serious music, you have to have the right atmosphere. But of course, Delia can't understand that.
Delia. Who's Delia?
Well, you might not think it to look at her, but she's my mother.
Oh, dear. For a moment, I thought you were going to say there was a little wife or a lady friend tucked away somewhere.
Oh, no, nothing like that.
A lifetime of wheedling has given Edwin a perfect sense of timing in playing up his weakness. Now he deliberately pauses to finger a couple of sad notes on the piano and then, as if arriving at the breaking point, unburdens himself with a rush.
In fact, I don't know why I'm telling you all this, but you see, I don't think my mother ever really wanted me. My father used to tell me that she forced him to marry her, and she's the reason I applied for this job. You see, I need the money so that I can't get out and find a place of my own, somewhere I could really work, write music. If you want to know the truth, I can't stand my mother. She disgusts me. She's one of those people who can never leave you alone, always running after me and forever asking me stupid questions. I don't know.
You poor boy.
If only I had the money for somewhere to live. I'd leave her tomorrow.
But wouldn't she miss you?
Oh, she'd manage. God knows she's always saying, I'll manage, dear, I'll manage. The trouble is with just the few pupils I have for music lessons, I can't afford to go.
Well, you won't need any more pupils now, will you?
That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, how much were you actually thinking of paying?
I don't know, really. What do you think? Something like 75 a week, of course.
Why, yes, I think that'd be very fair.
Well, that's better then, isn't it? I never like talking about money. Do you?
No, I mean, to say it's not that important, is it? I mean, not like relationships between people and that kind of thing. The thing is, though, I'm going to have to move out, give up my pupils. I'll have to know for sure. I mean, when were you thinking of starting? I mean, when could you let me have some money?
Well, I've still got some family matters to tie up, but that shouldn't take more than about a week or two, and then I don't see why we couldn't start rehearsing right away. But I'll tell you what, I'll get you some money first thing tomorrow, and I can pay you a month in advance. Maybe we could meet and have dinner together somewhere downtown. Would you like that? Somewhere nice?
That sounds fine.
Good. Well, how about coming downtown with me now? I have to collect my costumes.
I promised my Delia that I'd be home for supper.
All right then. I'll drive you home. I'm sure it's on my way. How's that?
Fine.
He gets up to follow her out. High angle, starting on the empty hall, we hear Edwin and Jane approaching. Jane leads the way across the hall, prancing like a 10-year-old.
Do you know, I'm so excited. I'm just sure everything is going to go marvelously for both of us.
As Jane holds the front door open for him, it seems that she is going to lean over and kiss him on the cheek, but Edwin scoots through the door rather too quickly. Jane smiles indulgently and follows him out. The door closes and there is a moment of silence, followed by sounds of activity from Blanche's room. The camera swings around to face the door just as it opens, and Blanche wheels herself out. She stops to listen. The sound of Jane's car is heard starting up. Blanche moves towards Jane's bedroom at the far end of the gallery. The big car stands outside the garage with the engine running. Jane closes the garage door, gets into the driving seat, turns an all-consuming, indulgent smile on Edwin, who is bouncing gently in the comfort of the passenger seat like some clumsy, short-sighted penguin. Jane lets out the clutch of the car, slowly moves away. Blanche crosses the bedroom, glancing around quickly like someone who knows what they're looking for. Moments later, she has found Jane's box of chocolates on the dressing table. She starts to eat fast and wildly like a person on the verge of starvation. In her haste, she accidentally shifts the box to reveal an autographed photograph of herself underneath. A fan mail picture of Blanche Hudson as she appeared in one of her films. The face has been ravaged by the heavy stroke of a pencil, but the signature is still clear and unmarked. Blanche picks up the picture to examine it in silent horror. She goes to replace it. She finds that it has been hiding a checkbook and a sheet of notepaper that is covered from top to bottom with painstakingly accurate copies of her signature. She holds the notepaper up to compare it with the signature on the picture, but it is only a gesture. The truth has already hit her. She flips open the checkbook. One of the checks has been torn out, and written across the stub in neat capitals are the words Western costume. Below this is the figure $93. Blanche has a frightened, bewildered reaction. Jane's car stops in the roadway by the front of the court in which the Flaggs apartment is situated. Edwin gets out, leans at the window of the car to say something, and then as the car moves away, he turns and walks towards the apartment. As he reaches the door, he takes a last bemused look over his shoulder to see Jane's car receding down the street. Then he grits his teeth and prepares to face mother and home. Blanche's wheelchair skims along the gallery and comes to an abrupt stop at the top of the stairs, where Blanche grabs the newel post and stares down the hall. The telephone rests with sedate mockery on the table in the hall. The stairs leading down look impossibly steep, and the expanse of polished floor at the bottom seems limitless. Blanche closes her eyes for a moment. Then, setting the brake on her chair, she adjusts her grip on the banisters and very slowly begins to lift herself out of the chair. Blanche gets one foot onto the stairs, drags her other foot forward, and lets her weight fall against the banister. For a moment, it seems that her hands are not going to be strong enough, and she begins to slip, but she manages to hold on. Edwin sits hunched over a book at the table. Delia Flagg comes in from the kitchen carrying a tray. There is something infinitely sad about the glow of pride with which she beams at her son. She puts the tray down on the table, and Edwin irritably shifts his book aside.
What is it?
Our little breadwinner's supper.
I know it's supper, but what is it?
Macaroni cheese.
Oh, no.
He turns his back to his book as if the subject of supper were closed. Delia bites her lips, silently puts the plates and cutlery on the table, and looks at her son again.
Did she say how much she was going to pay?
I haven't even taken the job yet.
I know, dear, but didn't she say anything about money at all?
No.
He looks at his book again.
Still, it'd have to be a good lot. Someone like that. Be nice to have a bit of money again. We could even go on a holiday, perhaps.
This last idea makes Edwin look up sharply, but she does not notice it.
Do you remember that place we used to, up the coast, we used to go to, Eddie?
Yes.
It'd be nice if we could go there again, wouldn't it, dear?
Edwin grunts and lowers his head over the book again to hide a childishly cunning little smile. Blanche has gotten a considerable way down the stairs, but the effort has taken a terrible toll on her reserve. As she stops to rest and gasp for air, her eyes wander over the rest of the first floor, which is now within her view, and which she is seeing again as a stranger after all these years. The house is completely silent, with only Blanche's harsh, uneven breathing to accentuate the stillness. Somewhere down on the highway, a passing motorist sounds his horn. Blanche takes a deep, gulping breath and resumes her descent. Her drawn, weary face is contorted with agonizing effort to support her weight on the banisters. At Western Costume, Jane pulls her long Lincoln Continental out of the inside lane of the west-moving traffic on Melrose and turns right onto the parking lot. As Jane emerges from the now motionless car, we see the side of a huge building upon which is painted Western Costume Company. Blanche negotiates the last two steps, and reaching the bottom of the stairs has no alternative but to let herself slip to the floor. The telephone with its little table and chair seemed terribly long, a long way away. Blanche starts to drag herself across the floor on her hands and hips. Jane's car moves forward, pauses at the entrance to the parking lot, and then moves out and away onto busy Melrose traffic. Blanche crawls the last few feet to the telephone. Reaching the chair, she pauses, breathing hard, then drags herself up into a semi-sitting position. She grabs clumsily at the phone, knocks the receiver from its cradle, scrambles it back onto the table, and starts to dial. Close shot, telephone ringing at receptionist's desk. The telephone starts to ring and goes on ringing for a few moments until a figure moves into frame and lifts the receiver. It's Miss Hilt. A starched, antiseptic-looking receptionist speaks onto the phone with a voice that contains neither urgency nor curiosity. It sounds quite lifeless, like a recorded message.
Dr. Shelby's office, good evening. This is Ms. Hill speaking. May I be of assistance?
She waits with pencil poised. Blanche strains forward, her anxiety and exhaustion making her incoherent.
This is Blanche. Blanche Hudson. You've got to help me. Is the doctor there? I must speak to him.
She waits breathlessly. Miss Hilt would appear to know all about it. She evidently thinks as the long, suffering, hysterical Rich and Blanche's outburst causes no more than a slightly raised eyebrow and a faint hesitation in the receptionist's voice.
Well, he's with a patient right now.
Miss Hilt has the expression of someone who's not going to give away anything for free. Blanche is near to tears with frustration and anxiety.
But I've got to talk to him. I've got to.
Just hold on, please. I'll see if I can speak to him.
There's a click and the line goes dead. Blanche is forced to sit and wait. Jane's car comes purring up the drive and stops outside the garage. Jane gets out, stands for a moment, her head slightly raised as if listening for something. A male voice is heard on the line.
Hello?
Dr. Shelby?
She glances around, fearful of being observed. Ms. Hilt is sitting behind her desk with Dr. Shelby standing by her side. He looks reliable enough, but there's just that touch of asperity about him, which suggests that he might have a short temper where hysterical patients are concerned. There is already a hint of impatience in his voice.
Yes. Now, just a moment, please. Miss Hilt tells me you're a little upset. What seems to be the trouble?
It's about my sister. I need your help. I need you here at the house.
Has there been some kind of accident?
No, it's nothing like that. It's the way she's behaving. I can't tell you on the phone. You have to come over right away before she gets back and...
I don't quite understand. Is this some kind of emotional disturbance you're talking about?
Blanche is too agitated to notice it, but there is suddenly more light in the dimly lit hall, as if someone had opened a door. Blanche has her back to her camera. Her head is slightly turned. It is seen in profile.
Yes, that's it. She's emotionally disturbed, unbalanced.
Jane stands by the kitchen door, her eyes glittering.
Are you trying to tell me she's violent?
I don't know. I mean, yes, she is.
Blanche reacts with terror.
Are you sure this isn't a matter for the police?
Blanche continues to stare off screen, too frozen with fear to have understood the doctor properly. Jane's hunched figure is silhouetted against the open door of the kitchen.
No, I don't know.
Hello, Miss Hudson?
Yes, I don't.
Oh, very well. We clearly aren't going to get anywhere like this. I'll come over as soon as I can.
Before Blanche can say anything further, there is a click and he is hung up. Jane moves away from the door and starts to cross the hall quite slowly and oblivious of the clothes over her arm, which begin to fall one by one, leaving a trail across the hall until finally, as she comes into a close shot, she is empty-handed. Blanche is trying to speak.
That was...
I know who it was.
No, Jane, you're wrong. It was...
I heard you. I heard what you were saying about me. I know what you were trying to do.
I wasn't trying to do anything. Please.
Jane strikes her hard across the face. Blanche falls, taking the chair with her. Jane moves in to strike again, hiding Blanche from the camera, past the telephone receiver that is swinging uselessly from the table, and on the trail of clothing that looks as if they had been tailored for some monstrous child. The sound of blows as Jane strikes out again and again is heard. The sounds of the beating finally die and are followed by silence. Camera moves into a close shot of Blanche lying twisted in a corner with her head resting against a wall. Her eyes are open and staring blindly. Jane's footsteps are heard moving slowly back to the table. The receiver is replaced and lifted again. Jane's movements are calm and unhurried. She dials a number and waits serenely for a reply. The telephone on the other end of the line rings 2 or 3 times, and then someone lifts the receiver.
Dr. Shelby's office, good evening. This is Miss Hilt speaking. May I help you?
This is Blanche Hudson again. I'm sorry, but do you think I could have another word with the doctor?
Oh, well, yes, certainly. I'll see if I can catch him. Hold on, please.
Jane waits and turns to look at Blanche with a mild speculative interest. Blanche's eyes are still wide and staring. She lets out a faint whimper. The voice of Dr. Shelby is heard on the phone.
Hello, Miss Hudson. I'm on my way now. Miss Hilt just caught me at the elevator.
Oh, I am so glad I caught you in time, Doctor. I'm terribly sorry, but I'm afraid it's all been a silly misunderstanding. I guess I was just upset. I'm very sorry, but we're not going to need you after all.
But I understood.
Oh, yes, I know. But it seems Jane's gone to another doctor on her own.
Well,
yes, another doctor.
of course, if she's chosen to go to someone else.
Jane smiles as she murmurs sympathetically into the phone.
Yes, it's really very thoughtless of her. But of course, as you say, if someone else is treating her, we can't really interfere, can we? I'm sorry. Goodbye.
Jane hangs up, walks over to Blanche, and catching hold of her arm, starts to drag her across the floor like a sack of meat. Jane's car stands outside the garage with its engine running. She closes the garage door and is just coming around to get into the driver's seat when she catches sight of something off screen. Edna Stitt is walking up the drive toward the house. Jane slams the car to angrily and hurries forward to meet Edna.
Good morning.
I thought I told you not to come back until next week.
Yes, but I had a free day today. So I thought I'd come by and see if there was anything you needed to do.
Well, there isn't. And you could have saved yourself the trouble. I was going to send you a note, but now that you're here, I might as well tell you. We are not going to be needing you anymore.
I don't think
We're closing the house. We're moving out. Blanche wants to take a smaller place by the ocean, and doctor said it would be good for her. So that's what we're doing.
Yes, but just a
Oh,
moment.
don't worry. You'll get paid for today. I'll send you a check.
I'm not worried about any pay. I'd like to see Miss Blanche before I go.
Well, you can't. She's still asleep.
Edna has already sensed that something is very wrong, but she deliberately pursues her point with complete innocence.
That's all right. I don't mind waiting.
Well, maybe not, but I haven't got time to wait around. I've got to go out. So just give me the keys to the house and I'll mail you the check for what we owe.
She holds out her hand commandingly.
I'm sorry. I don't have the keys. I guess I must have left them at home.
Jane is far too agitated to recognize this is a straightforward lie. She hesitates for a moment, then turns on her heel, stalks back to the car, switches off the ignition, and comes back.
All right, you can send the keys when you get home. All I know is you're fired, so you can just go away.
Without waiting for a reply, she turns around, walks back into the kitchen, and slams the door. Fighting down her mounting hysteria, Jane leans against the table for a few moments, then goes to the window, cautiously moves the curtain aside, and peeps out. Edna stands indecisively in the drive as if debating whether or not to follow Jane and have a first-class row. But then, with a last glance up the direction of Blanche's window, she turns reluctantly and slowly walks away. Jane smiles and lowers the curtain. Then moving over to the kitchen cupboard, she takes out a bottle and a glass, and like a child rewarding herself for a good deed, pours herself a very large drink. Edna walks towards the bus stop near the corner and sits down on a bench to wait. A bus moves into frame and stops, hiding Edna from view. The bus pulls away again to reveal Edna still sitting on the bench, watching the intersection intently. Jane's car pulls up at the intersection, waits for the traffic, and then turns onto the main highway that leads downtown. Edna opens her purse, takes out a key, weighs it thoughtfully in her hand, then gets up to walk back the way she came. Jane's car crawls along in heavy traffic. She bears down impatiently on her horn. A policeman standing on the sidewalk looks up sharply, registers Jane's car, and then decides that it's all too much trouble anyway, and the traffic moves on. There is a little rattle of a key in the lock. The door opens and Edna steps into the kitchen. Having defied Jane, she is now just a bit nervous and moves cautiously. Closing the door behind her, she starts across the kitchen, notes the half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table with a disapproving frown, and goes out onto the hall. Edna comes to the bottom of the stairs, pauses, and calls out gently.
Miss Blanche?
There is no response. After listening for a moment longer, Edna climbs the stairs, moves quickly along the gallery, and stops in front of Blanche's door. She knocks very gently.
Miss Blanche?
No response.
Miss Blanche, are you awake?
Again, there is silence. Edna reaches down to open the door and is amazed to find it locked. She pushes firmly against the door, but there is no doubt about it. The door is locked. Edna rattles the handle and pounds on the door.
Miss Blanche, are you in there?
Appalled by the lack of response, Edna turns away, calling out as she goes.
Wait now. I'll go and find a key.
She runs along the gallery into Jane's room. Edna searches rapidly through the junk on Jane's dressing table without results. She pulls out a drawer from the dresser, tips the content onto the bed, and scrambles through the collection of gaudy scarves and cheap jewelry without finding what she wants. Another drawer, this one full of clothing, is tossed on the bed, causing the pile of soft toy animals and dolls on the pillow to topple over and scatter on the floor. Jane comes up to the counter and with a tight little jerk pushes a check through the bars to the clerk. The clerk, a sober-looking man with glasses, is still clearing the counter from a previous transaction. He looks up at Jane and smiles.
Good morning, Miss Hudson.
Jane nods and manages a brief smile. The check lies untouched on the counter. The clerk finishes clearing his counter.
How's Miss Blanche these days?
Blanche? Oh, she's fine. Of course, she doesn't like this weather too well. She's older than I am, you know.
Your deposit slip?
The cash, Blanche. She wanted me to get it all in cash this time. I guess she has some special reason.
Yes, but doesn't she normally, if she isn't going to deposit her monthly allowance, she usually gives us a call to let us know just what she wants, doesn't she?
She hasn't called?
I don't think so.
Oh, well, I guess she must still be asleep. She gave me the check last night.
I see. Just a moment, please.
He moves away towards a second clerk further down the counter. Jane grips the counter tensely. The clerk is talking to the second clerk, who has his back to the camera. The second clerk glances around at Jane, nods gravely to his colleague, and glances at Jane again. Jane offers him a weak, encouraging smile. The first clerk comes back and opens the drawer under the counter.
I guess that'll be all right, Miss Hudson. Did you want all cash?
Please. Thank you.
There you are.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Jane gives him a quick, anxious smile and moves away. Edna hurries along the landing, carrying a heavy hammer and a screwdriver. She kneels down in front of Blanche's door and examines the lock. In keeping with the Spanish style of the house, the lock is a heavy wrought iron affair that is firmly embedded in the timber of the wood in the door. Seeing that there is no headway to be made in that direction, Edna turns her attention to the hinges that carry the door itself. The screwdriver is inserted into the gap in the hinge, and Edna starts to tap at the base of the hinge pin with a hammer in an effort to raise it. As she works, she keeps up a constant flow of muttered conversation, designed as much to calm her own fears as it is to console Blanche if she should be listening.
Miss Blanche, I'll tell you right now, if that sister of yours has been giving you sleeping pills or something to keep you quiet while she's out doing I don't know what, I'm sure as hell going to have the police on her.
Edna wields the hammer with increasing force. Cut to Jane's car comes up the drive, coasts into the parking area and stops. Jane gets out and is already on her way to the kitchen entrance when someone calls out.
Oh, Miss Hudson.
Jane stops and turns. Mrs. Bates, wearing her gardening smock and carrying a pair of clippers, is hurrying across the yard. Jane waits impatiently.
I'm glad I caught you. I hope you won't think of it as an imposition, but I've been meaning to ask you for some days now.
Yes.
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm kind of short on help around the house, and I was wondering if you'd mind my asking your cleaning woman if she could give me 1 or 2 days a week.
But I know you can have her anytime you want. My sister and I are moving out, so we don't want her anymore. But if you have to call her, she isn't here. I've already let her go.
But I just saw her come in.
I know, but I sent her home.
But that's impossible. I just saw her come in a little while ago.
Jane stares at her in sudden consternation, turns up her heel and runs into the house. Mrs. Bates is left standing, speechless. Cut to Edna is on the verge of removing the first hinge pin when she hears the kitchen door being slammed. She puts down the hammer and gets to her feet like someone ready to do battle. Walking across the gallery, she stares angrily down the hall as Jane comes in. Jane stops to look up, and the two women glare at each other in baleful silence. Then, as Jane starts to run up the stairs, Edna turns to wait for her. Whatever the outcome of their conversation might have been, the tone of it is settled by Edna's first aggressive comment, after which Jane is already on the defensive.
So you finally decided to come back home, huh?
What are you doing here? I told you you were fired.
Never mind that. I want to know what's going on here.
You said you didn't have your key.
Well, it just so happened I did. So now you can go ahead and tell me what you mean by locking Miss Blanche in her room.
Well, this isn't Blanche's house. It's mine, and I can do what I like.
It don't make a bit of difference whose house it is. You have to act like a grown woman, just the same as everyone else. Suppose there'd been a fire or something and Miss Blanche was locked up like that.
Well, there wasn't.
Now open that door and let's stop all this nonsense.
No,
Then give me the key.
no, she's asleep. I gave her a sleeping pill.
You did, eh? Then you better give me that key and quick. Don't you know better than to fool with stuff like that?
I won't. I will not, and you cannot make me, and I'm not afraid of you.
All right, Miss Hudson. I'm not going to fool with you. If you won't give me that key, I'm going right down and call the police.
Well, you'll be sorry.
The key,
I never meant to do her any harm.
you better not have done her any harm.
She bends forward to unlock the door whilst Jane shrinks back. The door is pushed open and Edna stumbles forward a pace, unprepared for the dim light of the room with its drawn curtains. Edna's eyes dilate with some unspeakable horror, and her lips begin to tremble. The shaft of light from the doorway shines onto the bed. With her arms raised almost vertically by two cords strapped to her wrists and attached to the lifting bar above the bed, Blanche lies suspended in a way grotesquely reminiscent of a carcass hanging from a butcher's hook in a slaughterhouse. As she struggles to raise her head and stares at camera with seemingly blind, sunken eyes, she lets out a choking sound that is muffled by the ugly strip of surgical tape stuck crudely over her mouth. As Edna falls back, her hand searching blindly for support against the door, Jane bends down behind her and picks up the hammer. The figure on the bed is trying to convey some terrible and immediate terror with a convoluted thrashing of her body. Camera swings around to a close shot of Jane, her eyes and face suffused with the fury of a child that has been tried beyond endurance. She cries like a tortured animal and lashes out and down with a hammer. Delia Flagg is fussing with a duster, polishing the television set and a vulgar little plastic lamp that stands above it. Edwin enters from his bedroom, drapes his jacket over a chair, and goes to fix his tie by the mirror. He peers at his reflection with enormous interest, studiously ignoring his mother, who has stopped dusting to watch him.
Going out, are you, dear?
You know I am.
He starts to whistle a brutally syncopated version of I'm Writing to Daddy. Delia flicks abstractedly at the non-existent speck of dust on the table.
Having dinner with her?
Uh-huh.
I'd forgotten.
Edwin glances irritably at his mother's reflection in the mirror as if to say, you're a liar. But he is feeling too pleased with himself to pick a quarrel, so he just turns to put on his jacket and head for the door.
You won't be back too late, will you?
Who knows?
He goes out the door, smiling and thinking maybe he won't be back at all. Interior of the Hudson House, night. Starting on a closed door as it burst open and Jane staggers into a darkened room. With a glass in one hand and a bottle in the other, she fumbles for the light switch on the wall, spilling her drink in the process. Finally, a light springs on over the piano at the far end of the room. Jane lurches across the room, steadies her bottle on the piano, and drags her beloved scrapbook towards her. The picture of baby Jane Hudson smiles coyly. Jane distorts her face into a starry imitation of the little girl's smile, then gulping down another drink, she turns the page to a picture of baby Jane in a dance routine. Beneath the picture is a faded newspaper cutting dated September 30th, 1913. Jane stares down at the page, muttering thickly.
You could have been better than any of them, but they didn't want that. No, they didn't love you enough. Do you know that?
She sways back, grabs at the album for support, and sends it to the floor amidst a shower of loose photographs. She tries to bend down to pick up the album, lurches forward, and ends up on her knees. Starting to gather up the pictures, she grabs at one that her knee is resting on. The full close-up of baby Jane tears right in half. She whimpers and tries ineffectually to hold the two halves together, but she cannot hold them steady, and in a sudden fury tears the picture into pieces. The doorbell rings shrilly. Jane starts back in fright and cowers against the base of the piano. There is a pause, then the bell rings again, longer, more insistent. Jane scrambles to her feet and creeps with an elaborate cunning towards the window that looks out onto the front porch. Holding the half-empty bottle of scotch in one hand, she carefully pulls the curtain aside with the other. Edwin Flagg, looking like a fat, restless bug, waits impatiently on the doorstep.
Edwin?
She drops the curtain and staggers away towards the door, using the wall to support herself. The hall is dark with just a single light glowing from the gallery. Crossing the hall as quickly as she can, Jane has almost reached the door when something makes her stop and turn to look up at the gallery. The gallery hangs as if suspended, a single point of light in a cloud of darkness. The door to Blanche's room is half open. Jane suddenly remembers and turns to stare fearfully at the front door. The bell rings again, loudly, angry, insistent.
No, I'm sorry, Edwin. I can't let you in. Not now.
As if in contradiction to her words, she moves slowly towards the door. Convinced he has heard something, Edwin rests his hand on the door and listens carefully. The faint muffled sound of heavy breathing is heard. Edwin frowns, half afraid, half angry.
It's me, Edwin. Miss Hudson? Who's in there?
There's no response. Jane is leaning against the door as if she meant to comfort it. She listens in silence as Edwin shuffles his feet. There is a long pause.
Oh, the hell with it.
As his footsteps begin to recede, Jane can hardly prevent herself from calling out to him. She stifles a cry and goes on listening until finally the sound of Edwin's footsteps die out. Then Jane begins to cry. She pounds impotently on the door, turns away, and moves unsteadily towards the stairs. Up on the gallery, the door of Blanche's room remains half open. Jane starts to climb the stairs, loses her nerve, and sinks down against the banisters, crying bitterly. The house is dark and silent. We detect a faint movement by the kitchen door. We hear rather than see something being manhandled through the doorway, down the step and into the yard. Moments later, Jane emerges from the shadows and passes through the dim pool of light that comes from the Bates house across the way. She is pushing a metal wheelchair towards the garage. Jane's back is to the camera and obscures the content of the chair from view. But it would appear the heavily laden with one of the wheels has developed an intermittent squeak. Jane reaches the garage, moves forward along to slide open the door, then comes back for the chair. Before she disappears into the darkness of the garage, we have the brief impression of a heavily blanketed figure sitting motionless in the wheelchair. The sound of the wheelchair rattling across the concrete floor of the garage is heard. A car is approaching along the highway. It slows down near the gates, and then the lights sweep past, up the drive to the Bates house. Mrs. Bates Ford stops in front of her garage. The lights are doused and Mrs. Bates gets out. As she moves towards her back door, Mrs. Bates becomes aware of the dim light shining out from the Hudson's garage. Mrs. Bates slows down, pauses, and then changes direction to go investigate. The big car faces towards the garage entrance. What light there is comes from the interior of the open trunk at the back, where Jane, partially obscured by the lid of the trunk, appears to be spreading a blanket. The wheelchair standing facing the camera next is to an open trunk. It is now quite bare, with only a rather coiled blanket draped across the back. Mrs. Bates appears in the doorway and reacts with a mild surprise.
Oh, Miss Hudson, I thought.
Jane looks up petrified. Mrs. Bates falters at the end of her sentence.
I'm sorry. I thought perhaps you left your lights on.
Jane slams down the lid of the trunk, throwing the garage into darkness. Bewildered and uneasy, Mrs. Bates steps back into the dim pool of light outside the garage. The sound of the empty wheelchair rattling rapidly across the floor to the entrance is heard. Jane emerges from the garage.
I just came home and I thought the lights of your car were on, and I've had that happen to me. And
That's all right, Mrs. Bates.
yes, I've had that happen to me. Wake up in the morning and you find you have a dead battery, and that's no joke. Well, as long as everything's all right, I'll just say goodnight.
Good night.
Mrs. Bates moves away towards her house. Satisfied that Mrs. Bates is really departing, Jane turns away and wheels her chair quickly back to the kitchen, lifts it up the step, and disappears inside. A few moments later, Jane's appear in the doorway again and looks out. A light springs on in the Bates kitchen and the door is closed. Jane comes out of the kitchen, locks the door, hurries across the garage, and disappears inside. The sound of the car starting in the garage is heard. The headlights blaze up and the car comes out, sweeping from the garage and tears away down the drive. The house is dark and silent again. The darkened window of Blanche's bedroom is seen. Gas station, Hollywood. An enormous billboard towers up into the night above the gas station. The advertisement features a gigantic hand reaching out for a telephone. Peace of mind is just a telephone call away. Beneath this, in more discreet lettering, is the name of a funeral director's offering family service. Camera swoops down to find tiny figure of Edwin waiting impatiently on the sidewalk for a caller to vacate the nearby telephone booth. A man comes out of the telephone booth and Edwin runs up to grab the door. Edwin dials quickly and then waits impatiently as the phone at the other end begins to ring. Edwin is near to tears with petulance and frustrated greed. The telephone on the hall table is ringing shrilly. The sound echoes through the big dark house, but there is nobody there to answer it. Edwin sits at his apartment, spooning cornflakes into his mouth with a kind of absent-minded fury and ignoring his mother, who sits across the table from him. Dressed in her street clothes with a parcel of groceries at her feet, Delia watches her son with a cautious, injured expression before speaking.
Well, what do you think you'll do?
Don't worry, I'll manage.
I suppose you think I'm just making this up.
I don't have the faintest idea.
Well, Hazel should know, shouldn't she? She worked right in the same studio, and that's when it happened. Just after one of those studio parties, right in front of their own house, Jane Hudson drove a car straight at her sister and crippled her for life.
Oh, come on. Do you mean she tried to kill her?
Yes, she tried to murder her own sister.
Well, how is it they didn't arrest her then?
They would have, only the studio had it all hushed up because of Blanche Hudson's career.
Yeah, that sounds very likely.
Infuriated by his disbelief, Delia rises from her chair to stand over him.
Yes, doesn't it? So the fine woman you've chosen to run around with turns out to be broke and a murderer as well.
I see.
Well, it's true.
All right, then. If it's true, then I'll ask her about it when I see her again, shall I?
You're not going to see a woman like that again.
Why not? You just told me she's got a rich sister.
You haven't even heard the worst of it yet.
You mean there's more?
Yes, there is. After she run down her own sister, your precious Jane Hudson just ran off and left her there to die like some poor animal. She just walked off and disappeared for 3 whole days.
So then what happened? Don't tell me they couldn't find her.
Oh, yes, they did find her all right. They found her in some hotel room with a man she'd never even seen before.
What are you complaining about? Isn't that how I was conceived?
He goes out, slamming the door behind him. Interior hall of the Hudson house. The telephone on the hall table is ringing. Jane staggers through the darkened hall to answer it.
Hello?
Good evening. Is this Miss Hudson?
Yes?
This is the Los Angeles Police Department. Sergeant Hanlon speaking. We understand you have a Miss Edna Stitt working for you. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Well, no, she left
She did? When was that?
a week ago, I guess.
I see. Well, we have a report here filed by her cousin listing her as a missing person. Did she tell you what her plans were or anything like that?
No, she didn't. But no, I don't know anything at all.
Well, we have a couple of other addresses to check. Maybe we'll come up with something. Otherwise, we'll probably be getting in touch with you again. And meanwhile, if you hear from her, we'd appreciate it if you'd let us know.
Yes.
Thank you and good night.
Night.
She
Night.
hangs up, walks away slowly, pauses, and then suddenly starts up the stairs toward Blanche's bedroom. The room is in darkness with only a narrow shaft of light shining in through the open door. Jane appears outlined against the doorway.
Blanche.
She moves into the room without switching on the light. As she goes to sit on the edge of the bed, her face is lit up by the light from the gallery, but the figure that lies on the bed, half suspended from the lifting bar, remains in deep shadow.
The police are looking for Edna. It was her fault, you know. She wouldn't go away. You heard her. She wouldn't leave me alone.
There is a feeble wriggling movement from the figure on the bed. Jane looks at Blanche absent-mindedly, then reaches forward, takes the surgical tape from her mouth, and unties her hands. Blanche, still hidden by shadows, flops down onto the pillow.
I don't know what to do, Blanche. What am I going to do?
She waits for a response, but either through fear or exhaustion, Blanche remains silent. Jane rises to move across the room to the window.
If they find her, we'll have to run away. That's what we'll do. We'll just go away where they can't find us. But then I won't see Edwin anymore. And he wouldn't like what I did. It wasn't my fault, but he wouldn't like it. Well, I don't care. We'll just leave. That's all. Go to the beach. Then we could be by the seashore all the time. Like we used to when I was little and Daddy was there. And maybe we could have friends. People that had come to see us. I'd like that. Blanche, listen to me, Blanche. I've always wanted things to be nice, you know? How could Edna make time to do a thing like that? Make me do a thing like that? I don't understand. It's like when they came for me in that hotel room and they told me you were hurt and that I had done it. And there was a man there, a policeman, and he hit me and slapped my face. And I tried to tell him, but I wouldn't do a thing like that. But
Jane, it wasn't.
he said I was a liar.
The accident. It didn't.
No, it wasn't an accident. I did it. You told me that yourself.
But I want to tell.
No, I don't want to talk about it. Every time I think about something nice, you have to remind me of all the bad things. I want to talk about something nice. Do you remember how I used to rehearse on the beach with Daddy? And I'd be dancing in the sand, and all the folks would come up and watch. Lots of them, all crowding around to see baby Jane Hudson.
For a moment, the memory is very real to her, and Jane looks as though she can really see back across the years. Then suddenly the picture is shattered. The doorbell rings long and hard. Jane starts back in fright and turns instinctively towards Blanche.
What shall I do?
Let them in.
What?
It may be Edwin. He can help.
Yes, it is. It's Edwin.
She starts quickly for the door, then stops dead. Her momentary radiance vanishes and replaced by a cold, hard anger as she turns to Blanche.
You now want to make him tell on me.
As she picks up the rope and closes on Blanche, the bell rings again. She stifles Blanche's feeble protest, grabs one of her hands that still has a cord attached to the wrist, and yanks the cord over the lifting bar so fiercely that Blanche is again half suspended over the bed. The doorbell rings for a third time. We see a policeman's sleeve ringing the doorbell. From the front door, Jane comes out of Blanche's bedroom, slams the door, runs along the gallery, down the stairs, calling out as she goes.
Don't go, Edwin. Wait for me.
The camera tracks with Jane across the hall, going faster at the time. Her hand reaches out to throw back the bolt, and then she pulls the door wide. Edwin stands on the doorstep, flanked by two policemen. Jane staggers back, petrified.
Edwin, what?
You see?
Miss Jane Hudson?
Yes?
I'm sorry, Miss Hudson, but we just picked up this young man at the bottom of your driveway. Says he was on his way to see you. Is that right?
Yes, of course, but I don't understand.
They're trying to say I'm drunk.
Let's just say you're a little happy, okay?
What do you mean happy? I'm not happy.
He lurches forward, and the first policeman catches his arm to steady him. Close shot. With one free hand that June, in her haste, left untied, Blanche is just removing the surgical tape from her mouth. It comes away painfully from her parched skin, but the only sound she can manage is a barely audible croak. She looks at the little bedside table and tries to reach out for it. Blanche deliberately launches herself at the table and just manages to touch it with her fingertips before the restraining rope jerks her back. The table rocks dangerously, but remains standing. She whimpers despairingly and sets herself for another effort. Edwin has evidently been giving the policeman a dressing down.
So there.
It's not a question of trying to run you in, just trying to protect your own interests and the interests of the householders around here.
You think I'm not a householder?
I wouldn't know.
Well, I am. So now you know.
Yes, now we know. Sorry to bother you, miss. Good night.
Jane gives them a frozen smile, and the two policemen turn to walk away towards their parked car. Jane steps out the door to watch them go until Edwin catches hold of her arm and pulls her back into the house.
Are they going?
Of course they're going.
He starts to shut the door. The rope around Blanche's wrist bites into her flesh. The front door slams. Blanche collapses, exhausted. The table is still standing. Edwin catches hold of Jane's shoulder as if to shake her.
What the hell happened to you anyway? I told you I had to have that money.
Oh, Edwin, don't be mad at me. I've got your money. Really, I have. We'll go right on being friends and everything, but don't be mean to me.
Who's being mean? You did promise, you know.
I know I did, and I am going to show you I meant it too. Look, we'll have a drink together. That's what we'll do. We'll have a drink in the kitchen, and it's nice there. And then I'll rush up and get your money.
Okay.
Oh, I've got something else for you too.
Yeah? What is it?
Well, it's a surprise. What would you like to drink? Scotch?
Fine.
They exit toward the kitchen. She continues to struggle. Blanche tries to reach the table. Jane enters and switches on the light. Edwin follows her quickly into the kitchen. She goes to the cupboard to get the drink that Edwin sits down at the table. The wheelchair stands in a corner with a soiled blanket draped over the seat. Jane puts the bottle on the table, gives Edwin his drink, then knocks back her own in one gulp.
All right, you finish your drink and I'll get you your present.
Wait a minute. Somebody was telling me something about you today. You sure you've got that money? Oh, never mind.
Jane gives him a terrified look and hurries out of the room. Edwin turns back to finish his drink and pours another. Blanche's bedroom, her eyes are wide. She lies there waiting and listening. Cut to Edwin is swilling drink with unaccustomed freedom.
I hope you're gonna like this.
Edwin turns to see her coming into the kitchen carrying a box.
It's something I used to give all my really good friends, all of the people that worked with me.
She opens the box on the table and holds out one of her baby Jane Hudson dolls. Edwin stares incredulously and is about to let out a bark of disappointed laughter when he looks up at Jane's anxious face and manages a moderately surprised exclamation.
Gee.
It's a genuine baby Jane doll. They used to make them specially.
It's marvelous. Very lifelike.
Well, now you just sit there and talk to Edwin, and Jane will run upstairs to get Mr. Flagg's money.
Well, how do you do, Miss Hudson? Tell me now, who was that lady that just left the room? Huh? Not talking, eh? I think maybe you need a drink.
He picks up the doll and tries to force his drink into the half-open mouth. The whiskey pours over the glazed features and runs down to soil the doll's dress. Quickly tiring of this game, Edwin has another idea. He finishes off the drink himself, gets up, and goes to put the doll in the wheelchair. He stands back to admire his work for a moment and then decides to improve on it.
No, wait now. You're not really comfortable like that, are you?
He lurches forward to pick up the doll again. Jane comes out of her bedroom holding a purse. She shuts the door and starts along the gallery. Blanche has been listening tensely. Now she squirms towards the edge of the bed, trying to set herself for a final effort to get at that table. Jane has reached the top of the stairs and is just staring down. Edwin calls out with drunken glee from the direction of the kitchen.
Hey, stand back there. Here comes the super chief.
Jane stops dead, staring down. Her expression freezes. Sitting in the wheelchair with the blanket draped over his head and the doll cradled in his paunchy lap, Edwin comes whirling across the hall, giggling like an idiot.
Edwin!
The chair slews around and stops abruptly. Edwin jerks up his head to face Jane, is running down the stairs, screaming at him.
Stop it, stop it.
Edwin stumbles to his feet, still clutching the doll, and backs away. Blanche launches herself at the table and is only prevented from falling out of the bed entirely by the cord that bites at her wrist. The table, lamp, and tray go over with a resounding crash. The crash reverberates throughout the house. Jane is brought up short at the bottom of the stairs. The blanket slips from Edwin's shoulders as he stands up, gazing at the gallery.
Christ, what was that?
Nothing. I don't know. It's nothing. I haven't done anything. Don't go in there. Listen to me, Edwin, please. She'll take you away from me.
But Edwin reaches the top of the stairs without looking back. Jane goes to follow him. Edwin runs along the gallery, throws open Blanche's door, and switches on the light. Blanche is hanging halfway out of the bed, her head nearly touching the floor and her arm held back at an awkward angle by the cord that bites into her wrist, with matted hair trailing on the dusty floor. The thing glares up at the camera with cracked lips that are drawn back in an involuntary grin, looking like a mummified skull, which some gruesome humorist has equipped with a pair of living eyes. Edwin stands helplessly in the doorway, trembling with fright and nausea. Jane appears behind him and tries to pull him away.
Let me go.
Oh, don't listen to her. She wanted to leave me.
She's dying, for Christ's sake. Don't you know she's dying?
You're my friend, Edwin. You're my friend.
Get away from me. Let me go.
He pushes her away with such force that she falls against the door and he runs out of the room. Edwin races down the stairs, only just avoiding falling headlong at the bottom. As he crosses the hall, Jane reaches the head of the stairs.
Edwin!
The sight of her makes him doubly determined to escape. Suddenly becoming aware of the doll that is still in his hand, Edwin hurls it away across the hall and runs out into the night. Jane runs down the stairs and goes to the door to peer into the darkness. Realizing she is too late, she turns back, picks up the broken doll, and begins to sob. Already out of breath, Edwin hurries through the gate at a half run, looks up and down the road for someone to run to, and finding the street deserted, he begins to walk quickly down the hill, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Still sobbing, Jane seems about to dissolve into a paroxysm of self-pity when another idea strikes her. Slowly, she closes the door.
He's gonna tell. He hates me and he is gonna tell.
Edwin is walking more slowly now along the right-hand side of the road. Becoming aware of the headlights approaching him from behind, he turns and starts trying to flag down the car.
Hey, stop! I gotta...
Edwin is lit up briefly in the glare of the headlights. He turns and curses as the car sweeps by without slowing. Blanche is still in the position in which Edwin saw her. With her one free hand, she is scratching weakly at the floor as if she were trying to raise herself, but she cannot do more than leave a wavering pattern on the dust with her long, cracked fingernails. Suddenly, Jane realizes the totality of her jeopardy, looks off towards Blanche's room, and hurries upstairs. Edwin, his face running with sweat, is hurrying towards the brightly lit intersection. Jane runs through the hall and up the stairs, calling out like a terrified child.
Blanche, Blanche.
She runs along the gallery and into Blanche's bedroom. Jane appears in the doorway. Blanche is still lying halfway out of bed with her head nearly touching the floor, her eyes closed, and it is impossible to tell whether she is dead or unconscious. Jane lifts her back onto the bed and starts to untie the cord around her limp hand.
Oh, Blanche, you've got to help me. We've got to leave. Oh, please, Blanche, please help me. We've got to.
She pulls at Blanche's shoulders to get her into a sitting position, then struggles to lift Blanche from the bed. Edwin is nearing the intersection. When he glances around and seeing headlights from behind, he steps out onto the road to make a determined effort to stop that car. Jane wheels Blanche through the kitchen towards the back door. Jane's car reverses in the garage and then shoots forward down the driveway. Wrapped in a blanket and with her head bumping loosely against the back of the seat, Blanche lies huddled in the passenger seat of the moving car. The gates loom up at the bottom of the drive. The car passes through the gate, turns right, gathers speed. The receding taillights glow and finally disappear. Santa Monica Beach, night. The long stretch of sand with waves beating up onto it seemed bare and deserted. As the camera tracks in, a patch of darkness that might be a small rock in the middle of the beach begins to take the vague outline of a human figure lying huddled on its side. Another shape, this one identifiable as Jane, moves up the beach from the direction of the sea. As she comes closer, we notice that Jane is pausing occasionally to scuff at the sand with her bare feet, as if enjoying the sheer luxury of being on a beach. Jane comes to sit down next to the huddled figure, which we now recognize as Blanche. With her legs stretched out in front of her, and propping herself up with her arms, Jane sits back and looks at the sea.
I like this place. We used to just sit here for a while. And in the morning, the sun will come up and it'll be nice. You should look at the sea. The water has all lights on it in the dark. You used to like that.
She turns to look out to sea again. She starts very quietly to hum a little tune. The great highway, day, seems to be shuddering beneath the unending streams of traffic that pound along it in both directions. We see little weekend houses that line the beach, and a close shot of Jane's old-fashioned Cadillac parked haphazardly in front of one of the houses. We see a leisurely hand wielding a child's plastic spade to build a mound of sand that is already some 6 feet long and 18 inches high. We pull back to reveal Jane solemnly digging away with a thoughtful, childlike expression on her face. The camera pans slowly over the top of the mound to discover Blanche on the other side. She is still lying as before, but Jane has draped a heavy blanket over her shoulders during the night, and now the sun beats down on her, apparently infusing some last remnants of life into her wasted body. She tries to raise her head to look around, but she cannot. The nearby lunch truck is designed to provide 2 service areas, one at the rear and the other along the side that faces the camera. 2 motorcycle policemen are sitting on stools at the end of the counter. Their motorcycles are parked close enough for the constant crackle of one of the shortwave sets to be heard throughout the scene. The first policeman, a friendly-looking man in his 40s, stirs his coffee thoughtfully, whilst his companion, younger and brasher, wolfs down a hot dog and scans a newspaper. A young assistant turns away from serving a customer and comes along the counter to speak.
I see they found that woman. Yeah, they found her all right. Sure is a rotten way to get your picture in the papers.
The first policeman looks at him sharply to see if he is making a joke, but decides he isn't.
Do you reckon you're going to find that baby Jane or whatever they call her? Sure, we'll find her, but I guess maybe it'll be too late. Say, what is this baby Jane anyway? One of Hollywood's all-time greats.
He picks up his coffee and starts to gulp it down. Bored with her game, Jane throws down her spade, brushes the sand from her dress, and stands up. There are now a fair number of people dotted around the beach. Jane turns to look around and smiles. For some obscure reason, the sight of all these people seemed to please her. Jane glances down to Blanche as if to make sure she is safe, and then walks away towards the water. Blanche lies in the sun with her eyes closed. A series of childish giggles above the general sounds of the beach is heard. Blanche opens her eyes and shifts her head to locate the sound. Sitting some 20 yards away is a trio of girls in their early 20s. Blanche struggles to prop herself up on her elbow and wave her hand. The girls go on giggling amongst themselves. Blanche tries to call out.
This young lady.
The girls do not hear, and Blanche is just sinking into the sand again, when one of them suddenly turns to look in her direction. Blanche beckons to her. The girl looks nervous and uncertain. She turns and murmurs something to her companions. Now all 3 of the girls turn to gaze at Blanche with open curiosity. Blanche beckons frantically, and the first girl points at herself with modest inquiry. Blanche nods, and the girl gets up very reluctantly to walk towards her. The girl steps within a few feet of Blanche, looks down at her timidly as if poised for a fight.
Listen to me. Please listen. I want you to get someone, a policeman. Tell him my name is...
Her words trail away as she stares at the girl in astonished disbelief. The girl's large dark eyes are wide with confusion as she is shaking her head.
But please, You can't refuse.
The girl shakes her head more vehemently, evidently in an agony of embarrassment.
Por favor, nada inglés, señora. Ay, triste, solo español, no inglés.
Before Blanche can make any further effort to get through to her, the girl turns on her heels and scampers away. Blanche lets out a dry sob and sinks down, utterly defeated. Lunch truck. A young sports car type of man comes up to the steps of the lunch truck carrying a small rack of empty bottles. He puts the rack on the counter and speaks to the assistant.
I brought back the empties.
That's right.
The assistant starts to count out some of the pennies for the bottles, and the young man turns to speak to the first policeman.
Officer, there's a car down there parked halfway out in the road. I almost got myself stuck in the sand trying to get around it.
I mean, the old Lincoln convertible?
That's right.
Yeah, that was here this morning when we pulled in.
The keys are right there, but I didn't want to move it. I thought maybe you'd.
Sure.
He moves away with his companions on his heels. The young man stops to pick up the change and goes to follow. The two policemen skirt a line of parked cars. Jane's old car is parked in the roadway. The first policeman moves into frame to check the license plate. He looks up, satisfied, but not particularly surprised.
Yep, this is it.
The second policeman runs back to his motorcycle, grabs the shortwave transmitter in the pillion. The first policeman steps back in the car and starts to walk around it as if he were examining some strange beast. On the beach, Jane is walking slowly along the edge of the water in her bare feet. Paddling like a child, she lets the occasional wavelets come up over her ankles and moves along quite oblivious as children play around her. The delighted screams of a young girl who is being chased across the beach by a young man. Jane looks up, sees the girl running away, and then registers the crowded beach. She looks around in both directions, suddenly aware of having lost her bearings. Then she sees Blanche, smiles, and sets off to rejoin her. Jane sits down beside Blanche and starts to put on her shoes.
Jane,
You must be hot.
Jane, help me. I'm afraid. You gotta fetch someone. A doctor.
I can't.
You must. If I die here, you'll be all alone, Jane. All alone.
I can't. They'll be mean to me. They'll take me away and be cruel like they were before.
No, Jane, they'll be kind. They will. Really. I'll tell them that you're not to blame.
Jane looks more confused and anxious than ever. Children playing around her stop to play as she passes. The delighted screams of a young girl being chased.
Yeah, I think we're...
Printed twice.
Yeah.
Jane,
There we go.
I'll tell them that it's not my fault.
Yeah.
Jane, I'll tell them that it's all my fault, that I'm to blame.
But you're not.
I am. I spent my whole life trying to make you pay for what happened when we were children. I never had anything then unless it came from you. I hated you for that. And the way Father used to send me away and spend all his time with you.
I don't want to hear.
You must. It's important for you.
But I know it all. I know it all so long.
Not all of it, Jane. When things changed, and it was me that earned all the money. Father was dead, so I never had a chance to show him. But you were there to take it out on me, and I fixed it so that you would be dependent on me. So you'd have to live on my charity like I'd had on yours. That wasn't enough, though. I wanted you to be grateful, just like I'd been to, but you never were. You'd never admit that anything had changed. And the more I beat you down, the more you looked foolish and cheap, stopped you getting married and having any real friends, the more you just laughed at me. So in the end, I made you waste your whole life paying for something you never did. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, Blanche. It keeps trying to come to me, but I don't know.
Remember how you always used to drive me everywhere? They called you Blanche Hudson's chauffeur at the studios. I liked that. But that night, That night I got hurt, you were terribly drunk. You got drunk and I wouldn't let you drive anymore. And when we got home, I made you go open the gate. You'd made me look silly at the party, imitating me, making people laugh. I remember watching as you got out of the car. And then I tried to run you down. But you saw me and the car hit the gate. Do you know, I remember thinking, even then, that you'd done that deliberately, that you'd known what I was going to do, and that you were pleased because, well, you knew I'd only hurt myself. Then you ran away because you were frightened, and I managed to get out of the car and crawled up to the gates. When they found you, they naturally assumed that it was your fault. You were so drunk and confused you didn't know any better. I just let them go on thinking it was you. I let you go on thinking and paying for it because that way I could hold on to you.
Jane suddenly turns her face away. Blanche looks at her sister's averted profile as if only now a thought had just occurred to her.
You weren't even ugly then. I made you that way. I even did that.
Jane turns to face her. She is no longer crying, and her face has an expression of such peculiar gentleness and detachment as to make one think that this final confession has finally pushed her over the edge. After a long pause, she turns to glance over her shoulder and then looks solicitously at Blanche.
There's a place that sells things up there. I'll get you something. Maybe they have ices. You like ice cream? I'll see what they have.
She smiles and walks away. As Blanche watches her sister go, her mouth begins to tremble. A terrible sob wrecks her wasted body, and she hides her face in the blanket. Several policemen are patrolling alertly through different parts of the crowd, ignoring the children that run back and forth across their path. A constant stream of people moves in and out of the snack bar building. A policeman moves through frame, his eyes traveling restlessly back and forth over the people sitting on the sand. As the policeman moves on, Jane comes into frame and crosses the path he has taken on her way to the snack bar. Jane edges timidly up to the busy counter and waits to be served. Her manner, voice, and childlike enthusiasm could all be those of baby Jane Hudson 40 years ago. She smiles anxiously, and a harassed male assistant stops in front of her.
Yeah?
Do you have ice cream?
Sure. What flavor?
Oh, well, what do you have?
Vanilla, coffee, strawberry, lemon.
Strawberry. I'll have strawberry, please. 2 big ones, please.
The assistant turns away to whip up 2 ice cream cones for her, and Jane looks around the snack bar with an amiable, childlike interest.
That'll be 40 cents.
Jane puts her purse on the counter and solemnly counts out the money. The assistant hands Jane the 2 cones and sweeps the cash up off the counter.
Thank you.
Holding the cones very carefully with 2 hands, she turns to walk out onto the beach. The 2 motorcycle policemen are moving slowly across the beach toward the snack bar. Jane comes out of the snack bar holding her ice cream cones, and one of the policemen's attention has been attracted. He nudges his colleague and they move forward quickly. Jane has her eyes glued to the ices as if willing them not to fall as she walks awkwardly over a patch of loose sand.
Miss Hudson?
Jane continues walking.
Miss Hudson.
Yes?
She turns with a smile on her face, and then as the smile dies, she looks confused and anxious. The first policeman closes with her and, taking her very gently by the arm, begins to walk in a quiet, friendly voice.
We've been looking for you, Miss Hudson. I'm sorry, but we have to find your sister. Is she down there on the beach with you?
Jane reacts pleasantly to his friendly manner.
That's right.
The second policeman moves forward, takes the ice cream out of her hands.
I'll take these for you.
Oh, no, they're mine. They're for my sister, Blanche. She's going to be a film star. Did you know that?
A crowd is quickly gathering.
That's right, miss. We want to find your sister because I think maybe she needs help.
Jane looks at him blankly.
I think maybe she's in trouble.
Jane reacts to the word trouble and looks around, becomes aware of the crowd that surrounds her. There is something reminiscent about the grouping of onlookers, something that gives them the appearance of a posed group rather than a mere collection of individuals.
Won't you show us where she is, please?
Jane looks at the policeman, puzzled, the beginnings of some memory flooding over her.
Won't you show us, please, Miss Hudson?
Jane smiles and nods, pleased to be of service. She takes a step back and composes her face in innocent concentration. Then, with a terrible delicacy, she lifts her skirt with the tips of her fingers, curtsies, and starts to dance. Closing shot from afar. Blanche lies on her side, her fingers opening and closing very slowly on a handful of sand that is gradually being blown away. The tears are streaming down Blanche's face, and she is shaking her head from side to side as if to deny not only all that has happened, but also the cruel joke of life itself. We hear the voice of baby Jane Hudson echoing as it did on the stage of a little Californian theater 50 years ago. She sings, "I'm writing to Daddy." Camera pulls back slowly to medium shot as the desolate childish voice soars up to take in the first policeman who is striding across the beach to the pathetic bundle that is Blanche Hudson.
That's it.
Yay.
Thank you. You guys are awesome.
Good job. Wow.
Eric.
Wow. Good job, Eric.
Oh my God, that was a lot of talking.
Hey, you have a sore throat.
I say, drink something.
Yeah. Oh, this has helped a lot.
I'm gonna make a
I apologize for any slurred words. It's my
Oh,
talk.
great. No, everybody was great.
Mwah. I love it. You guys were wonderful.
Now, who Ken's supposed to be? Or
what?
Ken
I-
was supposed to be somebody, right? Or